Agenda for Tuesday, March 18th, 2025. Adequate notice of this meeting has been given in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act, NJSA 10:4-6. On January 9th, 2025, proper notice was sent to the Courier News and the Star Ledger, filed with the clerk at the Township of Bridgewater, and posted on the bulletin board in the municipal building. Please be aware of the Planning Board policy for public hearings. No new applications will be heard after 9:30 p.m., and no new testimony will be taken after 10 o'clock p.m. Hearing assistance is available upon request. Accommodations will be made for individuals with a disability pursuant to the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, provided the individual with the disability provides 48 hours advance notice to the Planning Department Secretary before the public meeting. However, if the individual should require special equipment or services such as a CART transcriber, 7 days advance notice, excluding weekends and holidays, may be necessary. I would ask that everyone please rise to salute the flag. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Probst, have roll call, please. Here.
Excuse me. Mayor Mensch is absent for the record. Councilman Kirsch?
Here.
Mr. Pappas?
Here.
Mr. Magora? Here. Mr. Wang? Here. Ms. Sakura?
Here.
Mr. Banga is absent. Ms. Chartowich?
Here.
Mr. Chowdhury is absent, and Mr. Atkins?
Here.
Mark Peck, Board Attorney. I'm here. William Burr, Board Engineer. Here. Catherine Sarmad, Township and Board Planner. And Michael Sullivan, Redevelopment Planner.
Here.
You have a quorum, you can proceed.
Thank you, Ms. Probst. At this time, any members of the public wishing to address the board on any matter not listed on tonight's agenda may do so at this time. Before I call on a speaker, for this evening, I would like to acknowledge that this is not a public hearing. Obviously, the doors are open this evening, but anybody in the room that would like to comment on any matters that may, in fact, with businesses on the agenda this evening, may do so at this time. That will include any general commentary for our master plan consistency review, as the presentation materials were available on the township's website in advance before this general commentary can be heard. Otherwise, I'd like to clarify the order of tonight's business. The 1200 Route 22 consistency review is not considered a public engagement. Therefore, the presenter this evening will not be subjected to any cross-examination. This is for the Planning Department's consideration and deliberation this evening. Tonight is but a step in the lengthy process, as with any area in need of redevelopment in any public ordinance. Will do. Thank you very much. This is the public portion of the meeting at this time. I would like to formally invite the public for any general commentary on any land use matter in the township to come forward at this time. And once again, this is not a public meeting and it's not a public hearing.
It's a public meeting.
It's a public meeting, not a public hearing.
Good evening.
Okay,
Could
so-
you please state your name and address for the record?
Kathy Franco, 766 Weemac Road. Let me start by saying I'm disappointed to see that the mayor is once again not in attendance at a planning board meeting of which he is a member. The other thing is you talk about 7 days advance notice for accommodation, yet many times agenda items are not made available public with greater than 7 days notice. So to ask for accommodation is difficult if people don't know that an item is on the agenda. How can they ask for accommodation with 7 days notice? Just as a point of information. Master plan. I'm wondering when we might see a master plan for this township. The last full master plan was done in 1990. There's been many reviews done of that. And, you know, it's come up at many zoning and planning board hearings where we go back to the 1990 and then the reviews of it. We've gone through many surveys. We've gone through public hearings. We've put Post-it notes all around this room for what we want to see as a township, and we're a number of years overdue for that. So I'm wondering, you may not have an answer to that. I know the mayor didn't have an answer to that at the last town council meeting, but I would hope that that's still on your agenda. Finally, I want to understand the process for areas in need of redevelopment. From my understanding, the town council asks the planning board to see if it's an area in need of redevelopment. If the planning board decides yes, then it's memorialized, and it goes to the town council, and then they declare it's an area in need of redevelopment. The plan is then to be developed. Then it comes back to the planning board to look at as a redevelopment plan, and it's voted upon by the planning board. Only if approved does it go back to the town council as an ordinance to approve the redevelopment plan. Now, Councilman Kirsch, who's sitting up here, on October 1st, 2024, as well as many other times, has told the public that this would be a transparent process where the public would have numerous opportunities to comment on areas in need of redevelopment, on areas that are taking place. Yet tonight, you have said this is not a public hearing. So even though, and I know I'm not supposed to comment on something that's going to come up later and is on the agenda, I question why I'm not able to comment on what Mr. Michael Sullivan will present as far as how many units of affordable housing, how many buildings, whether the 50-foot limit includes the HVAC units that are going to be put on top of it, whether or not it's appropriate to put the data center closest to the residential units, or should that be closer to the highway because of the noise impact that will be, happening. So since Mr. Kirsch has promised this public, both at town council meetings and at planning board meetings, that we would have numerous opportunities to comment, when will we actually have the opportunity to comment?
Now would be an excellent time to comment.
So I've,
Well, I
You
am.
have the floor.
Ms. Franco,
You
I've
have
heard
the floor.
I've heard 3 questions.
Oh.
Let's start with the first one. The first one is about the master plan. We have our planner in the room this evening. So any general updates, potentially Ms. Sarmed would be able to answer that question for you. So let's start with the first question. Ms. Sarmed, any input?
I would be happy to answer that. Yes, the master plan has been in the works. There was a change in the professionals here, so after Ms. Scarlett Doyle had retired, there was a little bit of lag time, but I will say that, I have been authorized by the council to continue the master plan work to finalize it, and the estimated timeframe for that is to be adopted by June of this year. So it should be done in, the next few months.
That would be wonderful for us to be able to see as a public.
Thank you, Ms. Sarba. Now in response to your second question regarding the process of AINRs or consistency reviews. Mr. Peck, I believe, our board attorney, will be able to refresh some of which you've already divulged back to us, which most of it was accurate. I think there were a few things in there.
The procedure you described was generally accurate, but as for the time for public review, the public had the opportunity to comment as part of a public hearing. See, I think there might be issues with nomenclature. A public hearing would be when, witnesses make their presentation and the public has the right to cross-examine the witnesses, directly ask the witnesses question, this and that. Tonight is not a public hearing like that. That part of that relating to the redevelopment plan, we're at that stage of, it's already been declared an area in need of redevelopment by the Township Council. So now we're at the point of considering the redevelopment plan. The planning board's role in that is very limited. The board's role tonight is to determine whether or not the proposed plan is consistent with the municipal master plan as it's been re-examined over the years. And then also does the board generally recommend it to the Township Council to adopt an ordinance. So you can make comments tonight about the plan that's being proposed. You can do that now, and that's great. And the board can consider that. Mr. Sullivan's here, he'll listen. But tonight is not the night where you would engage with Mr. Sullivan. You could just kind of
So
make.
only during tonight's public comment does a
Correct.
member of the public have an opportunity to comment on the redevelopment plan that will be
can comment,
proposed.
right,
Well,
but-
myself or any other member of the public only has this moment, not after Mr. Sullivan speaks.
Correct, the time, and this is laid out in the statute
Oh,
that governs
Well, you know what?
4812A dash, I think 6 is the one that.
Well, only because the last, on a different area in need of redevelopment, I came up when it was under review, and I made recommendations, and I was told that was not the time to comment. So I'm just trying to figure out, when is my time to comment,
Well, as-
or any
as
other
it's
member
now
of the
been-
public?
Been now mentioned several times this evening, tonight, and at this point in time of the meeting, is your time to comment. Your
Okay, so-
time to engage and perhaps get into cross-examination, anything like that, would be the public hearing with the township council when they're considering the ordinance.
Oh, okay, so let me go through a couple of my concerns then that I thought I would ask later, but I guess will be now. So I see where it's 250 age-restricted units, with no more than 40 units in a building. So I'm assuming this will probably be no more than 6 to 7 units, as far as buildings, for these potentially 250 units. And they talk about a maximum height of 50 feet height. Will that be inclusive of HVAC units, or will HVAC units be in addition to that 50-foot height? You know, so will HVAC have to be, go above that, which will be 56 or 60 feet, with fencing and whatever to guard it, because that's also included in it. I know there's, I think, 3 properties that will be built for single-family homes. I think it's on 2.98-acre lots. I do wonder, because there's something about affordable units shall be deemed restricted to remain affordable for a period of 40 years. And then I do wonder what happens after those 40 years. As far as those units, like, do they just go market rate, all of them? Generators it talks about, is that just strictly for the data units, or will that also be for the age-restricted units? Because I know when I was a EMT on the rescue squad, and I was answering calls during certain states of emergency, a lot of our age-restricted housing did not have emergency generators servicing them at like 4 Seasons, and the EMTs were walking up 4 flights of stairs and carrying people down 4 flights of stairs, and those people had no electricity and no heat and no air conditioning and no services. So I wondered about that. The noise from the data center. Is this planning board looking at the noise from data centers? And I didn't bring up my phone to share with you. If you go on YouTube and you go YouTube data center noise, you'll see that many communities have concerns about the noise being generated from data centers. So my question becomes, when I look at the plan, the data center is at the portion of the property that's closest to the residential areas. Okay, it's closest to the single-family homes, and you're putting the, affordable housing and the senior or the age-restricted housing on the same piece. Why isn't the data center being put, if that's what you're going to put there, closer to the highway, so that that noise isn't impacting the residential portion so much? Those are my concerns generally, I think. Let me just see.
If you don't mind, I want to make sure that I have all of them listed. Mr. Sullivan certainly heard them, so I'm sure it's very likely he'll address them, but in case he doesn't, I certainly will on your behalf. So I've noted 5 items. Question about the HVAC units being or not being included in the 50-foot height. There was a question you had about impact of single-family homes. A question about what happens to the restriction after the 40-year period. whether there are generators for both projects or only one of them, and a concern about noise from the data center and the location, the proposed potential location on the property. Have I summarized that?
I think you caught it all. Thank you, Mr. Kirsch, Councilman Kirsch.
Can I ask you just for a little bit of more clarification on the second item, single-family homes, specifically, what are you interested in hearing more about?
Well, so you're talking about single-family homes. I think it's 3 single-family homes being put on Woodland or Woodside or whatever that thing is, and a cul-de-sac at the end. So I guess my question is, I mean, I understand you want to keep it residential, but will people, if you build it, will they come? You're building it against a data center. So, and then, what will be the cost? The other thing is, because it's an area in need of redevelopment, I'm hoping that none of this is considered for a pilot program, certainly not the 3 residential homes, but none of it in general, because the whole thing is the township as a whole relies upon all of the taxable property to support all of the needs, whether it's school, fire, whatever it is, fire, rescue squad, roads, everything. When you go into pilot, you reduce, you generally automatically cut out schools, which.
Well, the pilot changes the timing.
What?
The pilot changes the timing and the amounts.
It changes the amount, but it also changes who those dollars go to, because a pilot can be determined by the town council as to who to, allocate that money to. So you can give no money to the schools.
And this board, though, has nothing to do with pilots, whether or not to enter into a pilot agreement or anything like that. That is strictly a function of the township council.
Oh, okay. No, and I appreciate that, and I've probably gone beyond my scope, and I appreciate that, Mr. Peck. And I thank you all for your indulgence at listening to all my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Franco. Good evening. Could you please state your name and address for the record?
Curtis Kraut, 199 Adamsville Road, Bridgewater. I have to say, your opening comments really upset me. And they upset me because I have spent the last 3 months, basically, since the council voted to approve an AINR development plan draft from Mr. Sullivan. I've been trying to get a meeting to become at least aware of some of the elements and required elements that are part of the plan. The AINR investigation that was conducted by Mr. Sullivan was very comprehensive. I live on Adamsville Road, adjacent to this property. I've been involved in development applications on this property since 1986. Okay, I'm aware of pretty much everything that's gone on, and at this point in time, I'm really trying to understand that if Mr. Sullivan is going to be presenting his RDP for this property later in the meeting, you're saying that there is no opportunity for the public to interact with him in any way. Is that what because that's what I'm hearing.
Not tonight.
But this is supposed to be an interactive process. I mean, with all due respect to Mr. Sullivan and any board professionals that are here, I have professional skills also, and I've also been involved specifically with this property for a lot longer than pretty much anybody in this room. All right, so I really, if I have plenty of things to ask, but it sounds like, is it just going to get recorded in the meeting minutes tonight and then forwarded to Mr. Sullivan after he makes his presentation? I don't really get it.
Well, if this board determines that the plan is consistent with the master plan, and if it thinks that the plan overall is a good plan, it will recommend to the township council that it adopt the plan and implement it by adopting an ordinance.
But what if
And in
there's...
that process, of adopting the ordinance, there will be a public hearing and the opportunity for more engagement, and maybe, the ordinance would get, possibly amended in some way. The board's function here is very limited, and that's by statute. And we want to make sure that we follow the statute. It's a multi-step process, and, we're trying to follow the statute as closely as we can.
I mean, I read the AINR resolution.
Investigation
and-
report?
I'm sorry?
The investigation report on
The
whether or not
investigation report
Yeah.
that Mr. Sullivan drafted.
Yes.
I already agree that there's a lot of good historical information and reference point to springboard off of. However, it doesn't encompass everything. And there are questions that I have, and I'm sure other people have, we want to make sure that whatever you come up with for a redevelopment plan is not only accurate, but it also reflects optimally what could be in there, rather than just wait. We have all these different milestones in terms of accomplishing that tonight and then presenting it. There's nothing's happened before tonight from the public perspective. I got a copy of the the RDP draft earlier in the week, but that's only because I received it from Mr. Pappas. And he assured me that I'd be able to speak tonight and ask all the questions I wanted to.
And you should. And as I indicated to Ms. Franco earlier, now's your opportunity. Recite any concerns, any observations, any general comments you have, especially since you've had the opportunity to review the plan. Put them out there. And as Councilman Kirsch, diligently took note of what Ms. Franco indicated. I'm sure he'll do the same.
Right, but there's a lot more detail in what I have than what Ms. Franco brought up, okay? That's why I asked about a transcript and getting these questions down. And when are they going to be addressed, if not prior to it goes to the council, because it doesn't sound like there's going to be much of an interactive involvement to the public even then. So
No, I think that
concern.
that last characterization is inaccurate. It will go to the council. The council will, assuming this moves forward, will introduce an ordinance. That's at one meeting. It will then hold a public hearing with full opportunity to ask questions and provide input to your elected officials.
Well, forgive me, I have just an extensive development and engineering background, and I've been involved in public service as well on the code enforcement side for many years. And I have never really seen a process which is basically not transparent in any way, okay, and doesn't have the opportunity to make adjustments in terms of refining the optimal document that gets in front of the council for review.
I think there's every opportunity for that, because, Mr. Peck, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we have several options tonight based on the dialogue with Mr. Sullivan. We can either adopt a resolution, we can take no action, or we can take action that is something in between. We agree with this, we disagree with that, we'd like to change the other. So this is your opportunity through this planning board.
I'll articulate that to you, and then you guys take notes, and I don't know what
If you want to tell me the topic, you want to call out page numbers?
Okay, I'm just going to start from the top. One aspect of the RDP, I'm just referring to it in an acronym form, Mr. Sullivan's plan. In page 23, I'm just going back to the end of the plan, which is basically the review and approval development applications process and the relationship to existing development projects. All right, so my major general concern is that there has been, on parallel with this RDP effort, there's been an active development plan, an active development project in front of the Zoning Board of Adjustment since December of 2023. That's 16 months ago. And the last professional testimony given in the context of that project plan to build a warehouse on this same tract, okay, has been active since then, and there have been only one meeting with professionals speaking, and there have been 11 meetings since then that have been scheduled, canceled, continued, canceled, rescheduled, canceled, and that brings us to next Tuesday, which is supposed to be a formally scheduled meeting regarding this particular property to install a warehouse on it. And again, there's been no updating of any of the documentation that's been provided by the applicant, and it's the same applicant that the RDP and presumably the township is going to be negotiating with regard to any alternatives that are proposed in this RDP, assuming that it's adopted. So the basic question that comes out of this is that, so there's a meeting scheduled next Tuesday with the zoning board, and is this or any other redevelopment plan, if this or any other redevelopment plan is adopted by the township, how will this impact the ongoing review of the current warehouse application? I don't know if you can answer that at the moment, but it basically...
What I can say is that if the redevelopment plan under consideration is adopted as an ordinance by the Township Council, I don't believe warehouses are permitted use. And you have to operate within the parameters of the redevelopment plan if you're a developer. You can't go out, there's no use variance that can be obtained once there's a redevelopment plan in place.
So it establishes the guidelines that are necessary for any future development without exception. There's some, it looked like there was some flexibility in there that the planning board had, but...
There's flexibility within the redevelopment plan for minor bulk type variances, you know, like maybe setbacks here and there, stuff like that. But as for the uses, what's permitted in the area, that's whatever's in the plan, that's the only stuff that can be built.
Okay, well, my experience with the township and all these development applications, either through the planning board or the Board of Adjustment, have all been associated with conventionally brought development projects that are submitted application-wise to the planning office, and then they go through that iterative process. So if now the RDP produced by Mr. Sullivan becomes the adopted guidelines for future development on this property, if the owner of the property decides that they don't agree with the constraints of the RDP, can they still submit a non-conforming development application requiring a use or, for example, height variance? Because those are the two items. I'm sorry? They cannot. So everything, they will be constrained and they have no other legal recourse if they wanted to try to force it through.
I mean, they could maybe get a slight height variance, but if they try to go more than 10% over what's permitted by the plan, that's a non-starter. They can't.
Right. Well, because the RDP clearly says that a warehouse is not a prospective use in the future, at least as far as it hasn't been since 2022. So basically, everything is going to go through the planning board in terms of development applications once this is approved by the council.
If that's approved by the council and adopted as an ordinance, correct, any development plan for that property or the properties that are the subject of that plan would have to conform with that plan, would have to be consistent with the plan. So it would always come to the planning board, it would not go to the zoning board. Because you can't get a use variance, or what's called a D variance, once there's a redevelopment plan in place.
Right, well, there's two D variances that are obviously involved now, which is the use and the height. So, all right, next topic, mandatory components of the redevelopment plan, and they're outlined on page 9 of the RDP. These components are mostly favorable from my perspective, as they seek to correct many of the deficiencies of prior abandoned development elements from past and incomplete site projects. There are a few exceptions, however. One is that the access to the Graymark tract should not be allowed via the R20 lot that has access in the illustration. Is this videoed or not? I don't know. Sorry. So if you look at the illustration of the property, on the east side, there's an appendage that sticks out, which is labeled R20 lot with access to Adamsville Road. It's very close to where I live and one of my neighbors as well. It goes right alongside of his property. It's not really, in terms of dimensionally, a buildable lot, but it's referred to in Mr. Sullivan's RDP as needs to conform to other aspects of the R20 zone. However, it's never been used to provide access from Adamsville Road into the property. And did not see, it may exist, but it did not see any reference to excluding that option as part of the RDP. So that's one of the exceptions I'm noting. Also, although there's a general comment under the mandatory comment components of the plan, all stormwater management facilities, Mr. Sullivan does indicate that they need to be compliant with current state and federal requirements. But this has been a major issue for many of us that live along Cuckolds Brook, which traverses under Adamsville Road. And during many of the major storms that we've had in the area, and even certainly Ida, there was 20 inches of flowing water all throughout the wetland area and my own property and Adamsville Road. So this is really a major concern going forward. And most of those wetlands are on Lot 1.02, and as well as the R20 appendage that also connects into Lot 1.02. Next topic is use issues and comments. On the positive side, a warehouse principal use is not part of this gray mark RDP, and this is consistent with the 2022 master plan changes. However, the use inclusion of the age-restricted residential dwelling units in the rec center and single-family detached residential homes are definitely much more complementary to the residential zones that are around the periphery, which includes the R20 zone that me and many of my neighbors live in, as well as the R10 zone to the west along Woodside Lane. So those applications I don't really see much of an issue with. And also he's indicated that there's a plan to put a cul-de-sac on the end of Woodside Lane and allow the properties that are part of the gray mark tract that are along the east side of Woodside Lane to be developed with single-family homes on them. So the question that comes up is, are these detached residential homes only proposed along Woodside Lane, or are they also available as a principal use in the balance of the redevelopment site? And although it's talked about in the context of the homes only along Woodside Lane, it wasn't clear to me whether or not you could put, a whole development of single-family homes on the property. So on the negative side, with regard to use issues, Ms. Franco had already mentioned the data center. And I'm personally familiar with these types of facilities, but they usually require large numbers of exterior situated high-capacity cooling equipment. And they are usually situated both mounted on either the ground or on rooftop. And they were required to maintain the correct operating environment for the interior data equipment. These units typically generate a lot of noise, and that noise can bleed into the adjoining residential areas, both in and around the gray mark site. So that's the R10 zone and R20 zones around the east, south, and west sides of the property. So basically the cooling equipment, which is usually more of what's required, and heat pumps produce a constant source of low and mid-frequency noise emanating from this type of equipment, and it's usually very difficult to control because it's a lower frequency noise, especially if it becomes problematic after construction. And you know, I've been involved with other development applications in the township, and we've had to bring in acoustic professionals from Rutgers to come in, take sound impulsive measurements as well as ambient noise measurements at all hours of the day or night to see if they conform to the requirements in the township code. In this case, the whole data center is going to have a massive bank of heat pumps and cooling units. And they're likely going to be potentially, certainly during the summer, going to be on 24-hour operation. So there is in the plan, in the RDP that is, a proposed masonry wall buffer that's proposed around the property. I don't have a problem with it just from an aesthetic and from a visual screening ability, but a hard masonry wall is not going to do much to cancel out low-frequency sounds that are going to come out of these units. So that is a major concern. And with regard to the section, I'm only jumping ahead a little bit here, but buffering and screening requirements, which I believe are on page 16. So the RDP references the noise control standards for data centers on page 17. So there's a reference that says that a study and a professional, and it didn't really go into the credential details, but this is not a trivial type of vocation. I have an acoustic design background myself to some extent, and I've had experience with other projects in the town where noise has been an issue. So the acoustic impact study should be required of any proposed building and equipment design. There's some comment to that effect that's in the RDP. However, it seems extremely vague. So this needs to be tightly defined and tightly managed. And even more importantly, it has to be monitored by an independent acoustic engineer retained by the planning board at the expense of the applicant. At least that's my feeling. This keeps some objectivity in the process to determine if the design before it's complete has merit from the standpoint of sound dampening and sound control, because once the project is built, it's going to be very difficult, depending on where these units are situated, to attenuate any noise coming out of them. So it's going to be a problem, and I'd rather not find out about it after the data center is built. So at least we need to have some confidence up front, and then there also needs to be a sanity check after the design is implemented to ensure that it's achieving the goals that are part of the acoustic measurement restrictions, both for impulsive and continuous sound. Next topic are the bulk requirements. This is yard and height requirements, specifically with regard to height on pages 12 and 13. In the current township code, in the definition for the M1B, the bulk requirements for the M1B zone, the maximum building height is currently defined as 2 stories and 35 feet. The RDP proposes 4 stories and 50 feet. Basically, all of the projects that have been proposed on this site, including office buildings in the southern half of the property on lots 1.02 and I believe it's 1.04, it's closer to Woodside Lane. All of those projects have involved bringing up the physical grade on the land from the southeast corner of the property, which is basically where I live, Mr. Paloma and other people live, and bringing it up as much as 6 to 10 feet in elevation to level the property out, because all the drainage from surface runoff and everything on the property right now is scheduled to go into swale on the southern border of the property. This is between that property and the Eagles property. So if a building is allowed to be measured from its average elevation, that means that a 50-foot high building from the standpoint of residents is going to be probably on the order of 60 feet, and that's not, and that's not including any rooftop units. The code, township code refers to rooftop appurtenances like putting cooling equipment and heating equipment on the roof, which is usually mounted outside and ducted to the interior. This depends on the type of application, what type of use ends up getting put on the property. It could even be a data center, although honestly, I would be very surprised if a data center mounted stuff on the roof, because it just would create even more problems than they could handle. But so essentially, all these grading plans, whether or not it's for the office buildings that were last approved, like in 1999, they all show that fill has to be brought in to bring up the grade on the eastern border of the property, southeastern corner of the property, in order to level it out. In this case, they're planning to put a 180,000 square foot warehouse, but the same thing was true with 2 office buildings. Same thing was true with 2 hotels in one of the applications proposed, as well as 2 other hotels that were subsequently submitted in another development application like 3 years later. So,
Mr. Crowd, if I could just interject, I'm just being aware of my time a little bit here. Approximately how many more questions or commentary do you anticipate?
just a few more.
Okay,
Okay.
please proceed.
By and large, I think the plan is a good framework, okay? There's just some refinement and things that you guys need to be aware of. Mr. Sullivan should be more aware of when it's drafted, so that, we don't have to suffer through this longer than necessary. All right, so with regard to the height, like I said, because of the increased grade, that's going to end up looking like a 60-foot potential set of buildings out there, and that's going to extend over the treetops of the wetland area that's along Adamsville Road. And it's going to provide darkness to the new homes that are being suggested to be built along the western side of the property along Woodside Lane. They're just going to be in darkness until like noontime. So really, the height at proposed 50 feet, you could certainly build a building with less floor height than what's required to do with the 4 stories at 50 feet, such as 3 stories even at 40 if they need, a lot of room for plenums or whatever else for drafting and of heat and cooling. So I personally, I think that you should consider lowering the maximum building height to like 40 feet. Right now, it's specified at 2 stories and 35 feet, but 4 stories and 50 feet with the grading and everything else is really just going to be obtrusive. Excuse me. One issue that has come up repeatedly in many applications is the buffer requirement between construction on this site, which is the M1B zone, where it abuts the residential zones around the periphery. And the current applicant has not, they basically have ignored everything that's been recommended by the township professionals in the review of that particular design. But the bottom line is that in the current township code, it's still the same. It is section 126.332. Basically says where a commercial zone, M1B, abuts a residential zone, There's, in the case of the M1B, that basically there should be an easement buffer of 100 feet. And that's measured from the lot line. And then on top of that, to any construction on the site, then the setback would be applicable, such as either side yard or backyard or whatever it happens to be. And that would lead to a total distance which is beyond the setback by 100 feet. Now, for some reason, oh, I left it over there. Excuse me. So, right now, the question that comes out of this is a suggestion to change, this change or make it clear in the RDP, because right now, there's a minimum track setback of 70 feet that's specified, I believe, in Table 2. And in addition to is this in addition to the minimum yard requirement? That is, the backyard is 100 feet, and then we have the 70-foot track setback requirement. Does that mean that any construction on the property would be, say, 170 feet from that lot line? I hope that's clear. So that's principally, most of the exceptions or suggestions that I have regarding the current proposal. Otherwise, the data center, I personally feel that it might be too intense and might be too difficult to control the noise. And because the property in the back is about 14 acres of developable area, and it's surrounded by residential homes on 3 sides, I think it's risky, especially if the board doesn't take the bull by the horns and get its own independent acoustic engineer to at least verify whatever the design is that's going to be done by the developer. And like I said, even for this current warehouse project, which is going to be continued again on Tuesday of next week, that may be we still haven't even gotten to serious design reviews of many of these aspects with that applicant. All right, well, thank you, board members, for your...
Actually, before you go, let me, Mr. Crowell, let me make sure I got them in summary. I want to make sure I have noted in summary. So you were concerned about the warehouse application that is pending for the zoning board. I believe we described and discussed, yes, that is there, and it's certainly the applicant's option to proceed or not proceed with that.
There's several variations of that.
Well, I mean, that's in the hands of the applicant.
Chicken and egg thing.
That's in the hands of the applicant. Future variances on this property, there would be no use variances permitted, so I believe we've addressed that. You have asked, you've expressed concern about access via the property, the portion of the property facing Adamsville. You have expressed concern about storm water management, particularly impacting the brook that runs under Adamsville Road. And I'm sorry?
CUC.
Right, no, I know. I called it the brook.
All right, my hearing's terrible.
And you also expressed the fact that there are wetlands in that area. I also have on page 11, this was similar to Ms. Franco, concerns about the single-family homes on Woodside, the high-capacity cooling equipment required, and the associated noise.
Just to back up one little bit, the homes, the residential homes along the Woodside are less they're more well-defined in the RDP than the general question, which is, can the principal use for the balance of the property, apart from those homes on the west side of the property, be used to develop attractive single-family homes or some sort of...
Okay. So would they be expanded? Not the issue not being the 3, would there be more, is your question?
Well, I think there's only probably room for 3 currently along the Woodside Lane strip. It's not R10, but I guess the proposal is to take essentially the R10 format, or in terms of lot and other requirements, and just perpetuate it along land that's allocated from this tract to building the single-family homes. But then, can you also build single-family homes on the balance of the tract? And that's an open question for me.
All right, so I'll amend that. The rest of the concern on the rest of the tract, the high-capacity cooling equipment, noise, and the masonry wall, if that's going to be sufficient for particularly low-frequency noise concern. The need for an acoustic impact study. The current definition, in your opinion, is vague, and there's a necessity for monitoring. On page 12 and 13, you had some concerns about the bulk standards, including the 4-story 50-foot. Also concerns about elevation and grade.
That's a height standard. That's one of the 2D variances that's out now also. But right now, it's specified as 4 stories, 50 feet in the RDP. In the actual township code that exists now, it's 2 stories, 35 feet.
Okay. The actual elevation of whatever is built there, its grade and its impact on water management, the height impact on the homes on Woodside, and the last concerns you mentioned was easement buffers and setbacks. Is that a complete list?
Well, there are tables indicating the bulk requirements for the tract as a whole, for the additional requirements for the homes along the residential requirement along Woodside Lane, and then also for I believe, the data center and other developments on the property. And it is not clear in there, at least not to me, since it sounds like this RDP is going to be basically a standalone, and the section that I mentioned regarding the section 126.332, which is the where a commercial zone basically abuts a residential zone. There's a requirement basically of an additional buffer area of 100 feet, and that it's not clearly delineated, at least not that I could see in the RDP, to understand whether or not it's additive to any setbacks that are applicable. Depends. So if somebody builds a data center, is the data center going to be 70 feet away from the property line, if that happens to be its side yard or backyard, or is it going to be 170 feet?
Okay.
That's basically.
Does that conclude your commentary, Mr. Crump?
All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Charlene Kavanaugh. I am current secretary and one of the trustees of the Fraternal Order of Eagles, Area 2137, located at 350 Woodside Lane. I'm here to get more clarification and information as regarding how it impacts our club property. The first time I heard about this was from friends who happen to go to the same church I do and know that I'm a member of that club, and they brought it to my attention. I went online, looked at the proposal for this warehouse that was proposed at the time, and I'm sure you all are aware of the fact that the original write-up mentioned that abutting the site is the Elks, located in the R20 zone. We all know the Elks Club is well beyond Adamsville Road, and it's actually the Eagles Club that abuts the property that is in question. When I looked at the most recent development proposal, including this data center and the age-restricted housing and all that stuff. My first question is, are we still talking about building a warehouse and all these other things? Or is the new proposal the data center and the housing and the medical facilities and whatnot?
Well, I think all that's going to come out in the conversation, but it will not be a warehouse.
Okay, because we have a term.
Exactly what it will be or could be, that is the subject of the report and the commentary that we'll hear from Mr. Sullivan.
Our trustees meet every week, and I'm here representing the Board of Trustees, and I can take it to them and let them know, so we can let our membership know that something is being proposed and being worked on by the township. And I guess my other main question is the fact that, given where the club's property is, and it's a pretty extensive piece of property, it's a beautiful piece of property, it does abut the proposed development area. Is that not correct?
Yes, it does.
I believe so.
Yeah, because when I looked at the picture of the map, I can see our building, our clubhouse, and I can see the pavilion where, as we like to call it, the Grove, where we rent out, and that's one of our revenue streams that we help pay our bills.
You also own the fields?
I know it's a very extensive piece of property because we've got a big parking lot. And then beyond the parking lot is some other grounds that belong to the club. I'm not exactly sure where the lines are drawn between, because I know there's the water runoff and some other stuff that goes on there. I'm not really totally clear on where the boundaries are, but it's a huge piece of property back there. But again, my main concern tonight is to get more information about what exactly is being proposed there, so I can go back and present it to our trustees and see if they have any concerns. So when I come to next week's meeting, I'm not sure what the protocol is for that meeting, but
Well, Mr. Chairman, with your indulgence, what you'll walk away with from this meeting is, unless you've already had it, is access to the redevelopment plan. In addition, any commentary and conversation that occurs with Mr. Sullivan. So that's what you'll walk away with tonight. Okay. As far as the next step, presuming that action is taken by the planning board, it would then go to the council. The council is meeting on Thursday, so I want to be clear on that it's this Thursday. Meeting is at 7:30, and there would essentially be the same presentation made, but at that point, consideration by the council for an ordinance. An ordinance is a two-step process, being introduced at one meeting, then publicly advertised, and then a hearing would occur, and then an opportunity for the public to speak there. And then if positive action is taken, it's then taken at that second meeting in the form of an ordinance.
okay. And my last question is, since our property would be potentially impacted by any development on that, on the proposed property, are we supposed to be receiving something in the mail with regards to all this? Because we have not received anything, and I've been the secretary since June of 2023. And I'm very diligent about checking the mail. I had to call the township to find out what this was all about, only because my good friends alerted me to the fact that something was happening or being proposed. And I'm just not sure what the procedures are, if, the other residential houses along Woodside Lane, if they're getting mailed information. I got it on the email list, so we're receiving notices about the various meetings, which I then go online and I check the agenda, I check to see what else is new. But I was just curious as to whether or not we are officially supposed to be receiving something in the mail, because we have not received anything.
Not in connection with the redevelopment process. If and when properties apply for site plan approval pursuant to the redevelopment plan, then you would get notice. The redevelopment law is different from the municipal land use law. The municipal land use law, that's what would govern a site plan application or a variance application, before the planning or zoning board, as the case may be. And in those instances, yes, people who live within a certain distance of the subject property have to receive notice in the mail. But the redevelopment happens under the local redevelopment and housing law, which is a completely different statute from the municipal land use law. And while there's notice requirements, those notice requirements do not include a requirement to mail notice to
Just wanted to make sure we weren't missing out on something that was required
Yeah.
to be notified.
Yeah, no, this is a case where, if there's a newspaper, check your newspapers, but check the website.
Well, and there are two ways that the public is notified independent of any legal requirement. One is this hearing with its subject noted, it has been on our website. The second place is that we have two newsletters, at least two newsletters that go out. One is a general Bridgewater kind of newsletter, and then there is a second one that was initiated roughly 2 years ago, specifically calling out any we're basically the two land use boards, and proactively sending to anybody who's on that list the notices and access to the materials for both planning board and zoning board.
I said I had the club add it to the distribution list, so I get it to my personal email. I also get it to the club, so I'm covered.
Okay.
And I do go on the website and I check the agendas because
Okay.
Kurt
By being, and this is true for anyone who's in the room, or just generally any.
reads for over a year now.
Yeah, anybody who's interested in land use matters, the purpose of that email distribution is that at low cost, we can have broad-based distribution to anybody who may have interest in any land use matter.
I get that. We do the same thing. All right, that's all I have. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. Nick Patullo, representing my mother, Marie Patullo, 194 Adamsville Road. So I'm going to take a little different view, and I'm cognizant of your time regarding tonight's discussion. It's not going to be about engineering, because I know nothing about it. I'm a finance person. So it's going to be more of a humanistic element here. And I applaud Kurt's, the information that Mr. Kraut provided this evening, and I applaud his longevity on Adamsville Road. However, my mom and my dad lived on that road and currently live on that road for almost 60 years. My dad, my grandfather, my cousins, my uncles built the house that my mother currently lives in, which is in the valley of Adamsville Road, adjacent to Cuckles Brook. And I'm the one that typically receives the phone calls when there's a little bit of rain, forecast, or maybe even a lot of rain falls, because my mom is concerned about the rising brook and whether or not her home will be flooded again. The first time that occurred was in 1967 on Father's Day, where the Finneran Fire Department had to come in and pump out my mom and dad's basement, roughly 4 months after we moved in. And that's been a concern for the years that I lived there, and it's a concern until my father passed 3 years ago, and it's a concern presently for my mom. So when it does rain, I get the phone call about how much is forecast, how high the brook has risen at that point in time, and whether she should call the police. And the last time that occurred was approximately 2 months ago, and Bridgewater police came, knocked on my mom's door, and were very polite and provided a lot of support for her, and gave her comfort and calm during the storm. So the concern that I have is when plans are discussed about the wastewater management and that they meet current standards, I'd like to remind individuals on the board that my mom's standard is not to be afraid every time it rains, and that if there's any enhancement that needs to be made from an engineering perspective regarding this property, that should be one of the priorities when it comes to the humanistic element of development, and we all know that that occurs as we progress through our lives. So with that in mind, I hope that that's going to be not just a asterisk on some memo or another line item somewhere in buried deep in a paragraph regarding the standard, but that that information, the information I'm presenting tonight, is looked at very, very deeply and necessary action is taken. All right. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just address this briefly. So we've had several hearings already, and concerns about flooding have been prominent in those discussions. And one of the things that we've already learned is that what I will simply call the partially complete nature of this property has created challenges over time, to the point where we saw some photos of partially complete parking lots that are not operating in the way that they are designed to control the flow of water. What has occurred at this point, arguably, is the result of an incomplete development on this piece of property, and as a result, insufficient mitigation of the water. Anything that we consider here would address water. So it has been mentioned before, it will be mentioned again. I think that we all know in or near our properties where water gathers. I certainly understand the concern that you have for this property, for your mother who's still living there. And that has been raised up to now, and it will remain prominent throughout the rest of this process.
Thank you so much for your comments. I appreciate that, as well as my mom. Thank you.
Thank you.
First name is Aresti, last name is Baloma. I live at 205 Adamsville Road. My first comment would be, if the ordinance was changed on this property, why are we going through this process? That's the first one. We're building a warehouse. The ordinance says no warehouses. The master plan, I think, says warehouses on Chimney Rock Road. I know we put one there. Somerville Lumber's gone, okay? The signature, they backed out of the plan. Now, we put one up on 202, 206, I think there's one. The question is, why do we have a warehouse here in the middle of a residential neighborhood? Are there any warehouses in a residential neighborhood? I don't know. I really don't know that one, okay? But the question is, if the ordinance changed for this property, because there was a lawsuit on this property, don't know where it went, whether it's still going forward, whether we have to make a decision or not on the property first before it goes forward. You know what I mean? I like to understand why. Why are we going through this process? It's been over 18 months. Like Kurt says, we've been getting notice. It's not on, it's off, it's off, it's off.
That's with a different board. I really don't know anything about.
But we keep coming to the planning board.
No, you're going to the zoning board. There's been no such application here. What this is consideration of a redevelopment plan that would act as an overlay zoning ordinance over the property, and it would just give the township a lot more control over what could be developed on the site.
Okay.
This board has nothing to do with any.
Well, I'm concerned that we have residents on both sides of the street. We have Adamsville Road and we have Woodside Lane. Adamsville Road, as you can see, flooding, senior citizens, not young people. It's an old neighborhood. My other story is, I came out here 40-something years ago in Bound Brook. And Bound Brook was known for bars and I think churches. Is Bridgewater going to be known for warehouses and hotels? Because I see hotels all over the place. We're putting one behind Chelsea Village. 2 of them are going there. We put one across the street. I forget the name of it.
Hampton.
There's so many changes going on, which is fine as long as they're the right changes. You know, we look at the Red Bull Inn. That's been there 40 years. So many problems. How come that's not on the list of area that needs improvement or redevelopment? The place is an eyesore. It's always been an eyesore. It's been a headache for everybody in this township, especially the police department. But yet, it's standing there. You know what I mean? That's all I have to say. Everybody have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paloma. Anybody else?
Yeah, John Merton, 184 Adamsville Road. There, I believe, in the land, there's a thing of objectives that were wanting to be addressed. And one of them, I think, talks about protect and preserve Cuckold's Brook. I think the push, you probably have heard, as you mentioned, but all the flooding, is that we want to enhance it, improve it, not just preserve it the way it currently is. I think that you can probably go through all kinds of news reports and hear about all the flooding that's occurred there more than once. It's a primary access area for hospitals, EMTs, everybody, fire departments going up that road, try to get to 22. If it's flooded out, it's a problem. And from what I understand in the current proposal, there's even a potential to further impact upon Cuckold's Brook by the way that swale may be placed, and even maybe put more water into that area of the bridge. Concerned that by its, as was mentioned, that the lack of attention by the current owners of the property to maintain what's there has perhaps further done something. But I think one way or the other, whether it's through this mechanism or through the zoning board or whoever it is, to put the, so to say, the match or fire under the butt of the owners to do something to improve the drainage there. Then another point of clarity is, I think in the objectives is also to preserve and protect the integrity of the neighborhood. If we were talking about warehouses, we were worried about additional traffic from vehicles, trucks and so forth that would be coming down there. With this plan, I'm not sure if I saw reference to what would be maybe the potential additional traffic patterns that might occur there. And just worried about what would be ability to improve well, I guess what infrastructure. I mean, it's not just what needs to be done on the property as delineated by these lots, but the infrastructure and surrounding areas, which particularly is, Adamsville Road. So I'd like to, I'd like there to be a little bit more consideration and address of that at some point, because I think everybody understands that we need more ratables in the town, and progress going forward is important. A point of clarity, if I may, if this ordinance goes through, will it re-baseline all the building ordinances for any structures that might be done? Will they be required to adhere to the newest ordinances for everything? Because a part of my concern is what Kurt brought up that I wasn't really paying attention to initially was the height variances and the grading variances. So will this allowance for this redevelopment re-baseline everything, and will it make it easier or for a developer to go in there because they've got a whole different set of guidelines to use for this property in this area? Or will there be kind of concerned what are the options for a developer going in there, and what are the options for us? Are we looking at taking this plan as is, or are we better off trying to push against this and go with the warehouse plan? And that's not perhaps clear to me or the others by looking at what
Any existing structure will be unaffected by this plan. It's only if you're coming in to build something new, or do a renovation or a rehab, like you want to put an addition on, or anything that would trigger a land use application to the board, then you're impacted by the redevelopment plan. But if you're not planning on doing any development on your property, it won't have any impact.
So the current property, I'm not clear. It's not clear to me whether or not the current medical or building that's there for medical offices will stay as is, and is that delineated separate from any new structures that might be constructed on that site?
I can't get into specifics. All I'm saying is any new construction in the redevelopment area would be subject to the plan.
The plan essentially resets the rules.
All right, so there's no grandfathering of ordinances that may have been provided for a property.
Anything that's already there itself is grandfathered.
All right, so there.
So the office building is still the office building.
Okay, so there is a concrete structure for water control that's out. And I believe that has been stated somewhere that it's inappropriately designed and should never have been there. I think the original architect who did that said no. So is that going to be replaced, or is it going to be, there's that lack of clarity on my behalf.
So, Mr. Burton, that ties into your first question as well. You talked about protecting and preserving Cuckoldbrook. And I think, if I recall, we learned in the first hearing that there was a spillway on one of those first parts of the lot there, right? And that spillway, actually, I think they determined it was detrimental to the way that the brook flowed, if I'm not mistaken. We'll hear that this evening, a little bit more in depth, I believe. But I believe what some of the commentary was at the time was that potentially redesigning that spillway or removing it altogether, that could potentially help preserve Cuckoldbrook to the way that it should have been running in the first place.
Right. So when we talk about historical references to what Cuckoldbrook was, I have a map from 1939 when my house was built that shows Cuckoldbrook in a significantly different manner than it is now. So as far as a historical frame of reference to what it was, if it was brought back to that, we probably wouldn't be having any issues about flooding as it is. But over the course of years, decades, there's been a lack of attention to the floodplain and cleanup and maintenance of the flood zones there to improve the flow. So I would like to see that there's an attention being drawn to the infrastructure for something like that. Because I don't think you can just put something up without considering the much further downstream effects. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I just want
keep it a few
to
minutes,
follow up
Mr.
with
Kraut.
a question. It's Curtis Kraut, 199 Adamsville Road. I'm just really still confused about the revision process associated with this RDP document. Okay, that's the one that Mr. Sullivan is going to present probably later in this meeting. So in my case, I gave you some recommendations based on my review of the document. I didn't get a chance to interact with Mr. Sullivan, and mostly got feedback from you guys, and Mr. Kirsch took some questions. But as a designer and somebody who's been doing this type of thing for 40 years or more, I'm kind of confused based on the feedback that all of us have given you and the questions we've asked about, in my case, about this document specifically. Is there a revision provision that would allow the planning board to make alterations in this document based on feedback from either the board members' review of it or the public's review of it, prior to you guys just basically rubber stamping it and sending it up to the council, because it's on the agenda as an introduction of a future ordinance, or the RDP, I guess, for Thursday night's council meeting. And it seems like, is this a fait accompli to talk about this tonight? Or is this, it doesn't sound like it's a very iterative revision process.
Well, the board can accept the plan as it's presented, or the board can request changes to it, or the board can reject it in its entirety. Regardless of what happens, if and when a plan is adopted as an ordinance, redevelopment plans can and often are amended as time progresses. The ordinance gets amended, follows the same process. So, it can be changed, in the midst of this process or subsequently.
So tonight, you guys have the option to vote on sending this to the council or incorporating a change at this level. I'm not saying that you guys are, you were tasked with the responsibility by the council to come up with a redevelopment plan, and you hired a a contractor to do it. And so it seems like you should be able to at least discuss revision possibilities and things like that at this level before you send it back to the council.
We'd like to hear what he actually has to say before we,
I'm sorry?
so we'd like to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, I understand that.
Start deciding whether or not we're going to.
Well, the problem is it's like the cart before the horse here. So,
But Mr. Peck, let me ask you from a process standpoint, because this is important. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that this board comes up with a handful of items that we would like, removed, or something else clarified, or something else added. Would that then result in Mr. Sullivan going back and what we have now is draft number 2. In the time between now and Thursday, would that become draft number 3 that the council would be able to consider?
Yeah, I mean, if the changes were such that, they could be discussed this evening, and the board, agrees that, hey, we want to tweak it in this way and that way, and whatever, I'm sure Mr. Sullivan could turn it around.
So if the board provides clear direction on anything in this report that we would prefer to see different, presumably that would result in a slightly different document being presented to the council on Thursday, with the commentary that it is different from what you have was originally proposed in the following ways.
Yeah.
Okay.
The board could do that if it so wished.
Okay, so then the answer is,
highlight revision changes proposed or whatever, but I don't know everything. I'm just throwing out ideas based on my review of his document.
Yeah, but I think the answer is based on that guidance, that this is not a fait accompli. This is not a rubber stamp. This is an opportunity, after we've heard the public, to hear from Mr. Sullivan. The good news is Mr. Sullivan has heard each and every one of these questions, so presumably, his commentary will cover, or if it doesn't, he knows that he'll be getting many or most, or even if not all of these questions. And then the board has an opportunity as your representatives to identify certain areas, if there are any, that we would like to see revised, added or deleted. So this is the opportunity. This may be a non-traditional process, in that those who've been to other land use boards are accustomed to a witness and then the back and the forth that occurs. As Mr. Peck pointed out, that's just not the nature of this process. We are following state law and guidance, but in the end, I think that we will get to a place.
Is this process, I realize it's under redevelopment law, but does it actually preclude the public from interacting with professionals and people who give testimony?
At this stage, yes.
It does say that explicitly.
But it doesn't explicitly say, but it says here's how it's supposed to proceed, and that's not a part of it.
Okay.
And Mr. Peck, if I may, I continue to hear the word approval, and I'd like to remind the members of the public this evening, there's nothing up for approval this evening. So it's a recommendation, and whether or not this goes to council, we could vote not to recommend or vote to recommend. The council could decide something entirely different. So we are not the legal governing body.
Right, but you're a working group that has been chartered by the governing body to come up with a solution. And if you make a recommendation that says, yes, just accept this the way it is, even though there's, potential changes in the pipeline somewhere, it sounds...
That's not what it is. We haven't heard from Mr. Sullivan yet.
No, I understand that.
We haven't had the opportunity, and we haven't been tasked with just approve it the way it is. That is why we're here, to ask our questions, to be able to hear his testimony, and to be able to make our own decisions ourselves as well. We haven't even had that opportunity, and we took all your questions down. I took copious notes. I saw many of us doing the same, and we have a lot of the same questions. I've been on the site myself multiple times, and I intend to ask all the questions that you've asked if somebody doesn't already. We just haven't had that opportunity yet.
Okay. All right. I guess, you know, I understand this process, at least the way it seems to be going. But, you know, we have this meeting next Tuesday, and preparing for a hypothetical plan review for a development project like a warehouse that's basically been in the pipeline for 16 months. And then we got notice this week on Monday, yesterday, that this was, you know, a re-notification to people within 200 feet. And then in parallel, this process is going on with the AINR and the RDP produced as a result of its approval. If at the zoning board meeting next week, you know, it sounds, just based on the last time we actually had some part of review of this development application, it sounds like there are going to be more professionals testifying, presumably, or the applicant is just going to cancel the meeting at the last minute before we actually get there.
It's possible. We have nothing to do with the zoning board. We're not involved with the zoning board. We have nothing to do with their agenda. We have nothing to do with applications before them. I have no idea what's been going on with this warehouse application. Don't know. It's not part of our jurisdiction. We have nothing to do with that.
Right, but the warehouse consumes all of the RDP for the Graymark tract. So
That may or may not be, but we're in the middle of a lengthy redevelopment process. And right now, tonight, we have the proposed plan in front of us, which we'll hear from the planner, the architect of this plan, and I'm sure the board will have a number of questions for him, and just keep the process going.
But as a statement of fact, the owner of that property does have an active application with the zoning board and has worked with our office, ours, I mean the township office, and that presuming that everything is in good order, they have every right to proceed with their zoning board hearing next.
Yeah, no, I don't question that, but it's knowing the effectiveness of any determination of this RDP. It sounds like it would supersede anything that was going on at the zoning board level. So that if the application, for example, was continued to be heard next Tuesday at the zoning board, okay, and it's not complete, and in the interim, the council, I guess, introduces this RDP based on whether or not you guys approve it tonight with changes or whatever, that at that point, we're going to have, the basic question is going to be, presumably when you introduce it at the council, what's it, 30 days later, that the public will be able that it'll be presented at the council again, a final draft to incorporate as an ordinance or
I believe that the notice requires 14 days from one hearing to the next. I don't know if it's different because this is an area in need of redevelopment. 2 weeks. So you can anticipate, presuming that this or some similar plan goes to the council. The council would introduce on first reading. I guess that would be this coming Thursday. I believe our next meetings are typically every 2 weeks. Sometimes they're every 3 weeks, depending upon how the calendar goes. Ordinances, if I'm not mistaken, then have the ability for the mayor to overrule. Mr. Pappas, you can confirm, is that like a 30-day period? Something like that? Yeah, there is a veto opportunity or window, and then from there, potentially an override procedure by the council. So I think the thing to really focus in on is the action, if any, that's taken by the planning board tonight. And presuming that some action is taken and something is forwarded to the council, that whatever action is considered and potentially taken by the council on Thursday night. Now, if you're saying, well, wait a minute, we would have an introduction and first reading on Thursday, we've got this zoning board hearing on next Tuesday, are we going to end up with both? You know, I would think the answer is no. But, you know, ultimately it is the applicant who has the choice whether or not to proceed with that zoning board hearing next Tuesday.
Right, but assuming that the application still goes through continued reviews at the zoning board level, because it's a big project, and there are a lot of professionals that have not yet testified. So it would be entirely conceivable that it's going to be continued, even if the meeting is held on Tuesday. So if in the interim, this RDP is somehow, it goes beyond the introduction process at the council level, if at that point, it finally gets introduced as a resolution subsequently at the council with whatever revisions that you guys discuss based on feedback or whatever, either from the board or us directly, that at that point, the area is going to be subject to redevelopment law. Is that correct, Mr. Peck?
It all depends. Again, I don't know where the zoning board is with their plans. I just don't know. Possibly. When this gets adopted, if and when this gets adopted, it'll be an overlay zone and any application has to conform with it. I don't know what's going on with the zoning board, so I can't answer that.
But if the applicant, for example, refuses to,
We're kind of
Mr. Chairman, we're talking about hypothetical scenarios. We could be here all night.
Yeah, we
Correct.
really need to get on.
This is
with
the planning board.
actual-
We're not the Board of Adjustments, unfortunately. We don't have any access to the applications, nor,
okay.
oh, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Kraut. Anybody else? Just a few comments, please.
I'm sorry, Kathy Franco. I just had one or two more comments. One is, would you consider, when you're considering the 50-foot height building, the fact that I'm not sure, and I don't know if you are, whether or not Finder and Volunteer Fire Department has a ladder truck or not. Green Knoll does, and they service the mall and Center Bridge and those high-rises, but I don't know if Finder does, and that would be necessary to service that area. And the other thing was, Ms. Sikora, I know that you said a statement that, you're here to consider it, consider this plan tonight. The concern that the public has is that it is already on the agenda for Thursday night as an introduction of an ordinance. So it does seem like it's just going to be a pass-through from the perception of the public. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you.
I'd just like to address the firefighting nature. We have buildings in Bridgewater that are in excess of anything that our fire equipment can get to, and the solution there is internal fire suppression, and I'm certain that that would be in place here, in addition to any firefighting equipment that would be sent to the site.
Okay, because I'm just not sure whether or not, these, if it's housing, if it will require fire suppression, so, because that's not outlined in this plan, and I don't know what the requirements are from that standpoint. So it's just a point of information when you're looking at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Franco. Anybody else? Okay, that will close a public commentary. It is now 8:40. I'm going to call for a 5-minute break. We'll reconvene at 8:45. Bill, think I'll need a motion for that.
I'll make a motion for a 5-minute
Councilman
recess.
Kirsch, second.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Mr. Wang, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ms. Probst, could I have a roll call, please?
Chairman Bessia,
Here.
Councilman Kirsch,
Here.
Mr. Pappas.
Here.
Mr. Magora. Here. Mr. Wang. Here. Ms. Sikora.
Here.
Ms. Chartowich.
Here.
Mr. Atkins.
Here. Moving along to section 6 for our board meeting minutes. We do have a set of minutes from the special meeting that took place on February 19th, 2024. Any comments or changes to the record?
Move approval.
I'm sorry, which date, please?
That was February 19th, 2024. 2020, I'm sorry, I believe that there's an issue with the error, or there's an issue with the
The date.
set of minutes with the date. That should be February 19th, 2025 for the special meeting.
So the motion would be to adopt it as amended.
Who would like to make that motion? Yes. That's Mr. Pappas. Second, please.
I'll second.
That's Ms. Chartowich. Roll call, please.
Chairman Bessia,
Yes?
Councilman Kirsch.
Yes.
Mr. Pappas.
Yes.
Mr. Magora. Yes. Ms. Chartowich.
Yes.
Mr. Atkins.
Yes. Next, we do have a resolution for this evening, and Ms. Probst, if we could continue with the same habit that we formed, asking who is eligible to vote for this resolution. This is for the Icon Keystone, commonly known as 1120 Route 22.
Chairman Bessia.
I'm sorry, who is eligible to vote that evening, from that evening?
One moment, just give me 1 second.
Sure. The attendance here.
In the past, we've had on the agenda the list of eligible board members. We should probably reinstitute that.
That was cut off of the, I mean, it's not on the agenda. That's, we'll do Mr. Pappas. Mr. Chairman Vesio, I don't have that information with me. I have the wrong folder, I apologize.
That
It'll have
was,
to depend on the board to,
Well, if people, it was only a month ago, so if people can remember if they.
the January 21st meeting.
right. I'll start from this end of the board here. You're in present
And
that day.
this was the old Baker Taylor, right?
That's correct.
So if you remember hearing Baker and Taylor, I know I was there. You're removing the building in the front and basically maintaining the rest of the property.
The vacant office portion.
Right.
I know I was here.
I do have the, I apologize.
You do, okay.
Yeah, I located my notes.
Thank you.
So the only ones not eligible to vote, absent from the meeting, would be Mr. Pappas, Mr. Atkins. Everyone else would be eligible.
Okay. Any comments or changes to the record?
I'll make the motion to approve.
It's Councilman Kirsch. Ms. Sikora? Can I have a roll call, please?
Chairman Vesio,
Yes?
Councilman Kirsch,
Yes.
Mr. Magora. Yes. Mr. Wang,
Yes.
Ms. Sikora. Yes. Ms. Chartowich.
Yes.
And that's it.
Okay, seeing that there are no applications this evening for land development, we are Section 9, that's the Master Plan Consistency Review, which is being considered for the Gray Mark redevelopment, commonly known as 1220 Route 22. And who will be making the presentation this evening for this consistency review to the planning board?
Good evening. Is this on? Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Michael Sullivan, redevelopment planner, Clark Caton Hints Trenton. as far as presentation goes, it's really, I envision this more as a discussion, and I feel like the public has already stole my thunder in terms of describing what's going on here. But, so I'll give a brief description, overview of the plan, and then I can go right to the questions that were asked and try to answer the public questions, also maybe in the minds of the board. If there's any questions that you still have or that I've missed from the public, shoot them to me, and we'll get through this. And then ultimately, if there are any recommendations for modifications to this plan, we'll discuss those and see how that goes. So, yeah, what you're considering tonight for consistency review is a draft redevelopment plan for what we call in the Gray Mark Office Track redevelopment area, also known as we generically call it 1200 Route 22. It's block 221, lots 1.02, 1.03, and 1.04. The date of the draft is February 2025. I think someone pointed out it's draft number 2. And it's located generally the southeastern area of the township at the end of, near the end of Route 22 as it leaves the township. It was designated as a non-condemnation redevelopment area by the township on December 5th, 2024, which means that the powers of eminent domain or condemnation cannot be used within this redevelopment area. But overall, the plan seeks to revitalize this site, get it, promote economic development on the site, and clean up some deteriorated and dilapidated conditions that are contributing to, among other things, stormwater runoff and erosion in the area that are negatively impacting residents. In terms of proposed of permitted uses, the plan permits medical uses, offices, research, and those are provided for within the existing building or in that area. It also allows for a data center, which has been subject to the discussion tonight, an indoor recreation area, or up to 250 age-restricted multifamily housing units with an affordable housing set-aside of at least 25% of those units. It also permits and requires the development of no less than 3 single-family detached homes along Woodside Lane. That is an effort to sort of complete what's a one-sided residential street there, and also the construction of a cul-de-sac to residential site improvement standards for streets in order to provide safe emergency access and vehicular access, and also to provide an effective terminus for Woodside Lane, such that it's not used informally. Requirements of the plan: it requires, among other things, conservation easements within any stream corridors, wetlands, or other areas related to Cuckles Brook. It does require a masonry wall in combination with vegetative or earthen buffering where this property abuts abuts residential zones or residential uses. And that masonry wall is not a requirement for screening of acoustic properties of a data center. It's really meant to ensure that vehicular access, headlights, and things like that at the ground level are not going to disturb existing nearby residences. It also has extensive acoustic design requirements for the data center that are in here in terms of HVAC. And this goes beyond just screening of these elements. It also gets to the construction of those. It requires an acoustic impact study for the data center use and post-construction evaluation and mitigation if necessary, such that even after the site plan is approved and you predict what these sound levels will be, the planning board will have the right for a post-construction test and evaluation to determine if further mitigation is required with respect to architecture, systems, mechanicals, and other things like that. Thanks. In terms of the plan, that's what it does. There is a diagram up on the screen, and this is intended to provide guidance. This is a conceptual land use plan, and because we do not have development yet on this site or a proposal for development, this is still a conceptual diagram. But what it does do, it does show the relative locations of all the permitted uses which could occur on this property. And what's noteworthy is that along Route 22, the only use that's permitted there is the office, research, and medical uses there that exist within the existing building. There's no ability for a data center or recreational use or the senior housing or the homes that are single family to be located in that location. Similarly, in the rear of the property, it specifically identifies that that is a location where either a data center, indoor recreation, or the senior residential, multifamily residential may occur. So this is guidance in the plan, but it's mandatory. Any development plans that come in would have to conform to this in a substantial manner, which means they couldn't flip these and conform to the plan. That would require a plan amendment. Any deviation from a permitted use within this plan would require a plan amendment. Any requirements, any deviation from any of the mandatory requirements would require a plan amendment. It cannot be granted a variance or waiver by the planning board, and that's the way the plan's set up. So it's, even though this is a conceptual plan, it's very binding in terms of how a site would be developed here. That's the overview of the plan. I will say that in terms of consistency, and we identify consistency, the degrees of consistency with several planning elements of the town. It's consistent with the 2016 land use plan element of the town, which calls for economic development and revitalization, particularly along Route 22 in the commercial corridor. And the redevelopment standards reflect aesthetic concerns that were raised in the 2016 land use plan element. It's also consistent with the 2010 land use plan element of the master plan, which seeks to protect the quality of life of residents, enhance and increase tax ratables through diversity of high-value uses. This property has floundered as an office project. It was approved in the 80s, and it still hasn't developed. And so the township has been looking for those other high-value uses, which are, in contemporary terms, marketable and developable. And so this does that. It supports reinvestment. It encourages long-term sustainable site planning, and it enables more flexibility in development beyond the current ordinances. So, in my opinion, even if we were to tweak this plan with any adjustments tonight, it is substantially consistent with the master plan and the land use plan element. Are there any questions on the generalities of what the plan is or what it does?
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. I'd like to open up to the board for any questions on Mr. Sullivan's testimony.
Just have one. You mentioned wetlands. Is there any state-certified wetlands on that property, or is it just an assumption that they're wetlands?
There were wetlands delineated years ago when the, and I believe the current plan, the zoning board application shows wetlands as well as stream corridors and flood hazard areas.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Pappas?
Mr. Sullivan, I'm going to go through a few points and questions. On the, I guess the third page, you list Township Council. There have been some changes. Mr. Ring is no longer Council President. Mr. Norgalis is now Council President. Mr. Pedroso is Vice President.
Yeah,
So.
I didn't have my own election.
Yeah. Okay.
That'll be fixed.
Okay. On page 9, could you just clarify towards top of the page, redevelopment regulations? Could you just describe in the beginning of the second line, you mentioned consistent with use regulations. you mean what we traditionally say, land use regulations? Is that what you meant?
Yes, zoning and land use regulations, correct.
On page 14, bottom of the page, paragraph 8, this is in the section that would address the senior housing, if that were exercised. You mentioned administrative agent services. The township has an ordinance the council approved a number of years ago that require any projects, residential projects that have affordable housing, that the township's designated administrative agent would be required. So I will make sure you get that ordinance, and you could reference that, because that is something that exists.
Section 126-341.2.
Okay.
We'll get that in there.
Let's see. On the next page, page 15, in the section Open Space and Conservation Requirements, point number 2, you just mentioned open space requirement. Again, if this is developed for senior housing, that there would be some property dedicated or reserved for open space or of some sorts of recreation. I think you mentioned number 1 acre. I assume that would be handled in a site plan scenario, whether the 1 acre would be contiguous or spread out amongst the area of the project. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, the design of the open space would be handled as part of the site plan.
And on page 18, under post number 3 and 4, post-construction mitigation, maximum permitted daytime sound levels, and number 5, maximum permitted nighttime sound levels. And there was conversation tonight. There are various, I guess, decibel levels that are referenced. We have a township ordinance. Does this mirror the township ordinance, or are there any other state or federal standards that, likely state standards, that reflect, that these figures reflect?
Yeah, I think the daytime sound reflects the township and state, and the nighttime is somewhat less. And additionally, the nighttime sound levels are measured to the nearest residential building, not the nearest residential property line.
On the next page, page 19, you reference indoor storage, and again, this would be for the residential. I appreciate that, because many times multi-family structures don't have adequate storage for residents, and 40 square feet seems very appropriate, generous. So, just a comment.
You'll have a few bikes in there.
Yeah. And then under traffic, a little bit beneath that, again, there was reference to that. When would that, your language is the redeveloper shall submit a traffic study to protect the anticipated traffic generated by proposed development, potential impacts on public thoroughfares. What's the timing of that? When would that be submitted?
Well, until there's a development proposal and we know what the proposed land use is, then there's no way to do that traffic study. So that would be part of the site plan development, and what it's really meant to do is to ensure that the function of the public streets that surround this are still going to function, and if there are any improvements that are required because of this, any increase in traffic, then the developer should be on the hook for those.
Thank you. One last question, and you're not an engineer, so I might ask Mr. Burr to comment on this, but because it's more within his wheelhouse. But there's been extensive commentary on this about stormwater management, and members of the public have spoken tonight. We've heard before from this area of town that stormwater management is concerned with the flooding that we've seen. I'm just wondering if you could comment on that, and then Mr. Burr could comment on what standards would be required.
Yeah, the redevelopment plan requires that any development application utilize and conform to the most recent current standards with respect to the new DEP standards, which are incorporated in the townships.
My assumption is that the stormwater management requirements when this property was initially developed, and even subsequently for other approvals that were received, probably differ, maybe this is a question for Bill, differ today as compared, and what would be required under any development of this property as compared to before?
The stormwater standards that were in place when the prior approvals were granted were completely different. We've had probably, I would say, 4 substantial updates to the stormwater management ordinance that have been dictated by the state, 2004, 2018, 2021, 2023, that now have really raised the bar, really established a high threshold for the standards by which developers propose a development on the property, and it also allows me to provide a much more detailed review of the stormwater design. So much different, much more intensive now, and frankly, at some point in time when a subsequent site plan application is presented, that's going to be the #1 issue that I dig into because, frankly, of the history of that issue on this property. So,
And then this is one last question for Mr. Sullivan, because again, members of the public were asking questions. In that area, the data center, indoor commercial recreation facility, age-restricted multifamily dwellings, it's not necessarily all of the above.
Correct.
Okay.
Those are the alternatives.
Okay, so it's one of the 3.
Yes.
Likely. Okay, thank you. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Pappas.
I have a couple questions.
Ms. Sikora?
When, to piggyback off of Mr. Pappas, one of 3, how did we come to those 3? Is that all in one zone? Data center, indoor?
Those are permitted uses. Those are the permitted uses in that particular location.
Got it. As a data center, so I have some experiences having work locations around data centers, and there's a significant issue with phone service. So has that been addressed or looked into, and what the impact would be to phone service?
It has not.
Okay. According to access, I see 1 shared driveway access. Is that the only point that people would be able to access the back of the facility or the back of the property?
Yes.
There's
no access permitted between this site and Woodside Lane, and there's no access permitted onto Adamsville.
So in theory, the homes that would be built where the new cul-de-sac is, their backyard or behind their backyard would be.
Right. The way it's conceived is that they would have, a lot that conforms to the R10 standards. Then there would be a 40-foot buffer, but behind them before you got to any improvements.
Got it.
And a masonry wall.
Got it. From my experience on the site, I apologize, I'm bouncing around, I have so many questions. The area in pink, so the commercial office medical research facility that's already there, I know it overlaps the other property or the property next to it.
In terms of the lot lines themselves.
Yeah, where the parking lot is, yes, where the lot lines are.
Yes. Yes.
Is that subject to change if a new applicant were to come, or is that an existing condition?
Well, the way this is looked at is that the lot lines are fungible. Ultimately, when this is developed, there may be new lot lines created within the parcel. And so it's not really clear where those distinctions are going to be down the road.
That would be a new application and,
It would be, so let's say that somebody decides that they want to build a data center here, and they're going to build the houses, and they're going to, have the office building, and the office building is going to stay the way it is. Well, once they get that all configured, they would determine whether or not there should be or need to be new lot lines. There will be new lot lines for the houses, because they would be not part of this commercial or non-residential development. So there will be a subdivision that would be included in this, but until the configuration of the site plan is actually formalized, there's no way to know where those lot lines would fall.
the subdivision will require coming back to a board to,
It would all be done at one time. It's site plan and subdivision at the same time.
okay. But we would hear it again. Right, or no?
Subdivision,
If somebody, once the plan's adopted, if a redeveloper wanted to come in for site plan and subdivision approval, they'd have to come back to the planning board for that.
yes, all the development applications will come to this planning board.
Including height of the, the data center or indoor rec.
Whatever uses are in the plan, it'll be here. And if it's in one big application, they come one time, presumably. If it may be two applications. But if they were to come in with different applications, they'd have to show you what's going to happen, at least conceptually, so that you would have some confidence that you're not doing something that's going to have to be redone.
Right. And I'm asking these questions because I know the residents had a lot of great questions in there, and I think although we can discuss some of them tonight, it will be important that we rediscuss them when a new applicant comes on board. So there is accountability, stormwater management, the height of the building, and grading, if there was going to be a change to grading. On the area near Adamsville Road, that strange jet out on the side, I can't see how big that is, or guess, I guess. Would a home be able to be built there, or is it too small?
It's a narrow lot. I mean, ultimately, if it were unconstrained, you could find a way to put a house on that. In the data that we looked at, the state data, and the data from the development applications, it appears to be constrained by wetlands or with floodplain or something. So in terms of development, it's not clear that someone would develop it as a residence, but in assigning it to stay with the zoning along there, the R20 zoning, really trying to prohibit access. We could just say we prohibit access, but it may be that an emergency access could be there, but it's so constrained, I don't see it, and we didn't want traffic showing up over there within the residential neighborhood.
Got it. So it couldn't be used as an access point to the,
Right now, the way that the plan is written, that's R20 zoning, which is a residential zone. If a use on this on the redevelopment area, such as a data center, were to put a driveway through that, the accessory use, the driveway or the accessory structure takes on the nature of the principal use, so you'd need a use variance in order to put an access out there.
got it,
If it were developed non-residentially.
got it. That's it for now.
Mr. Solomon, if I can, I'm going to piggyback on Ms. Sikora's questions. I'm going to assume that we're just talking about a data center for now. So I have a few questions with inspiration from the public here regarding data centers. And many people probably realize that for a data center to be put in any neighborhood, the area needs to be uniquely qualified to support a data center, right? There's a lot of infrastructure that's involved. There needs to be power first and foremost. You need to have access to telco. You need to have major fiber optic drops close by. As they say in the IT industry, you don't want to be that many hops off of the feed that you're trying to get. But there are also things that are very important, such as emergency fuel availability for fuel delivery. Typically, I think FEMA has infrastructures, hospitals, and data centers as the top three whenever there's a major emergency, right? So I'm looking here and I'm just wondering, there also has to be access to the data center itself for emergency services. And typically, whenever a data center houses, whether it's government, major infrastructure, or utility companies, these types of amenities are close by and they are readily available. Is there anything that tells us today that this area is uniquely qualified and that's the reason why a data center is or would be one of the proposed uses?
Yes, we have an indication that there is power and the other factors are not a barrier to development of a data center here. Yeah.
And typically, data centers are on slabs. There's no basements. There's typically no foundations. How would the foundation of this proposed facility look? Would it just be on a concrete slab?
I couldn't tell you. We're not at that level. I mean, that's really in the architectural and engineering part of this.
Okay, jumping ahead a little bit.
We're really just looking at the bulk in terms of the zoning.
Okay. And if I could, and perhaps Mr. Burr, our board engineer, could give me a hand with this. They also tend to look at the floodplains when they're building data centers, whether it's in a 100-year or 500-year floodplain. Do we have any idea, as far as this area, Bridgewater Township, what type of floodplain this lies in?
So the application that is before the zoning board did, I believe, get an LOI from the state, which is a letter of interpretation that establishes the wetland limits. They also took a look at the floodplain and the flood hazard area. I don't remember the exact limits off the top of my head, but any future application for development on this property will have to thoroughly examine those issues and make sure, frankly, that it can be built in conformance with those requirements. So I don't know the specific location or elevations off the top of my head, but it'll have to fully conform.
Right.
And there are a majority of the easterly portion of the property where the Cucklesbrook comes in under 22, that entire portion of this property is constrained. So it would have to fit in really the area that Michael highlighted, give or take, in the magenta and the pink. That's really the development area of the property. Anything to the east is virtually useless.
If I could, Mr. Sullivan, one more question. Do we know if the proposed facility, would it be built for multiple tenants or a single tenant?
I don't know that.
Okay. I'm asking the question because some of the members of the public asked about the noise and what would be required to address the noise issue. And a lot of times the noise is impacted by the amount of cooling that's required, and the cooling that's required is impacted by the amount of kilowatts that are required to serve a data center. And depending on what type of tenants, how many tenants would be in this proposed facility, that could impact the amount of cooling that's required. They measure it in kilowatts, and then they measure each individual tenant in kVAs or kilovolt amps. Again, I guess as a general comment, we don't exactly know, it sounds, with the amount of cooling that's going to be required at this time until we know what the type of tenant that we'd be looking at then.
Correct.
Okay. Those are all the questions I have for the moment. Any other questions?
I mean, I have a sizable number that I can roll through. Maybe we should, I don't know if now is the time or let others have a bite at the apple first.
Is there anybody that does not have a laundry list of questions?
I have just one more. The purple space, are we confident that there are enough potential applicants that would want to take on that space, knowing it may not be a great data center area? It's restricted because there's so much of the property that isn't buildable?
Well, I think we've looked at other prototypes, other plans of data centers to just get a sense of the general scale, and we think that there's a data center that could fit in there. Alternatively, if you're configuring housing, that's more flexible, or a recreation center, which is probably analogous to the size of a data center in terms of its footprint if it's indoors.
And is there something that, this might be more of a question for you, Mr. Peck, if it were to be a data center, is there ways, should we include concerns now on, if phone restrictions or noise, because I know the noise, even though that might be underneath the decibels, what that sounds like, is that something for now or for if an applicant comes?
Well, there are noise parameters set out in the proposed plan now, where it says, can't exceed 50 decibels at the property line during the day and things like that. Then during the site plan process, an applicant of whatever use, they're gonna have to show how they're going to meet that standard. And then there's even post-construction monitoring and such.
Any other questions?
All right, well, you know, I'm gonna roll through all of them, and some of them have been addressed, and some of them were offered multiple times. So I just want to maybe go from the simplest ones to resolve first. So when Mr. Burton was up, he was concerned about enhancement and preservation of the brook in the neighborhood. I guess that falls under our concern that the overall management of water would be net better than before. So I guess my question to you is, based on this redevelopment plan, do you believe that a future state that includes one of these items that is properly engineered, that has water mitigation, appropriate water mitigation, would make the circumstance in the surrounding neighborhood better than it is today?
Well, I can say that conforming to the current standards would make conditions better out there today, but any further detail I defer to Mr. Burr.
Okay. And the current standards are more excessive than potentially they've been in the past, correct?
Markedly.
Okay.
Markedly more strict.
Okay. All right. Mr. Paloma, I don't believe there were any follow-ups. Mr. Patullo, also concerned about flooding, so I think we've covered that. And Ms. Kavanaugh was principally concerned about notice and taking information back from this hearing. So going to Ms. Franco, the first comment was regarding the any HVAC or other units, anything that would be mounted on the roof, and whether or not that applied to the 50-foot height restriction. And I believe the answer is 50 feet means 50 feet, correct?
50 feet means 50 feet. There are no exceptions for rooftop mechanicals or penthouses or anything like that in here.
Do we need to spell that out in greater specificity?
It doesn't hurt to do that. It
Okay.
wouldn't hurt. It would make it much more clear.
You know, if we're keeping now a punch list of items, you know, to edit, I would for one like to see that there's clarity that 50 feet means 50 feet in the township of Bridgewater. There was also a conversation about firefighting. I believe that, between that would be much further down the process, where there would be a review of an actual plan and sign off by fire officials and all that kind of thing.
Right, and during the site plan, if there are any comments by the fire official, they will make those comments as it relates to the plan itself. In terms of the buildings, that's construction code, fire code, that would be handled by the code office in terms of any fire suppression that would be necessary for the building.
Okay. And generally speaking, we have buildings that, we have, the Somerset office complex as an example. When you have buildings that exceed the height of your local fire apparatus, typically speaking, there is internal fire suppression, correct?
Yes.
Okay. There was some conversation about the single-family homes on Woodside. So this plan provides for, I guess, installation of a proper a cul-de-sac bulb, and then those three homes. Those three homes would be conforming to the local zone, correct?
Yes, the R1, R10 zoning is abuts it. We would continue the R10 zoning regulations there, and subsequent to any the redevelopment happening with those homes, there could be a consideration of actually just extending the R10 zone there so that they have complete R10 zoning rights.
Okay. And in the event that a builder or a subsequent homeowner would need relief to build something there, even if it was a deck or a patio, something that is in a setback or otherwise needs relief, they would have to come back to the planning board, correct?
That's correct.
Because they'd be subject to the overall restriction. In your experience, can attractive conforming homes be built? 3 attractive conforming homes be built there without the need for incremental relief?
Yes.
Okay. There was also conversation about the restriction on a senior. Is it senior housing?
Yes, it's age restricted.
The age restricted. I mean, that's governed by state law, correct?
Well, the age restriction is a requirement of this, right? So
Well, no, but exactly how age restriction is
I think the question was related to.
affordable.
Was related to the affordable
Okay.
units and the 40-year deed restriction.
Okay.
And upon expiration, the township could seek to extend those controls.
As we are doing with certain properties today,
Absolutely.
except that someone else will be sitting up here in 40 years.
Yep.
Well, I don't know. Maybe Will be up here in 40 years. Okay. Now, there's also been extensive conversation about generators, and you know, let's take them together. Generators and climate control, and noise associated with those. I believe the question was asked and answered in relation to Mr. Pappas. But one of the things that I would like to introduce for conversation is there was concern raised by Mr. Kraut about how an acoustic impact study, there was a certain vagueness to it. There was also potentially concerns about monitoring, ongoing monitoring, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he would want to avoid a situation where we're chasing our tail here, so to speak. We'd rather make sure that we don't have the problem than continuing to try to mitigate a problem. So is there any language that we can consider that's going to protect our community from such a scenario like that, associated with an acoustic impact study being more specific, what that means and what that is, and how monitoring would occur?
Well, I think we did I can tell you this, that we did not have an acoustic engineer involved in the development of the plan. We did the best we could in terms of identifying what we wanted to study and what the performance should be in terms of this. But we also built in safeguards, in my mind, that allow for post-construction evaluation and mitigation of any problems. So that means that post-construction, our consulting acoustic expert would review and then analyze any data from the site plan and make recommendations as to any mitigation, identification of any issues. If there are public complaints afterwards, in addition to that respond to them and go even beyond what the standards are in this plan in terms of the mechanisms that are identified in order to hopefully dampen acoustic emanation from the site.
Okay. So in your professional opinion, is the way that this is written provide sufficient protection? Is there anything else that could or should be added to this language?
Well, absent actually providing a scope for a detailed acoustic study, which we don't have, I think it does. I think it provides us the ability to evaluate, have our own expert, pre-approval and post-development. And it allows us to mitigate through post-construction mechanisms.
And that's sufficiently, in your opinion, that's sufficiently spelled out here? It gives us sufficient power to do
Yes.
to take those actions?
Yes, I also think that in terms of a redeveloper agreement, which is can be even more detailed than this, that that can be spelled out in a redeveloper agreement as well.
Okay. Can we even make a comment there that issue would be addressed through the redeveloper agreement?
Certainly.
I would feel more comfortable if that's spelled out so that, this goodness and knowledge is not lost tonight when we exit this room. So we talked about generators. We also talked about that from a noise standpoint. I guess that would be essentially, even though it's for a different purpose, that would be under the same umbrella, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. There was also discussion about the location on the property. Now, obviously, at this point, we just see, purples and things because we don't know exactly where the building or buildings would end up on the site because that's further down in the process. I guess just for clarification for us and for the members of the public, that's where assuming that we proceed, assuming that this planning board takes action, assuming that the council takes action, it's adopted and everything else, that's where an actual plans would need to be drafted, and that's where site plan review would occur, coming back to this board to discuss exactly where is it, exactly at what altitude, exactly what does the berming look like, right? All those details that either we or the zoning board regularly handle when it comes to applications, all of that would occur in advance of even a single shovel going into the ground. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. All right, so let me go down in another list that I've kept. I think that we satisfied the fact that there is another application before the zoning board, and that applicant certainly has the right to continue that following those procedures. Any future variance would be subject to coming back to this planning board, correct? Any future variance on this site, no matter how big or how small, we now have jurisdiction over this site.
That's almost correct. If there is a variance that requires a use variance, it would have to have a plan amendment.
A plan amendment, and this...
If it constitutes a D variance, like a height variance that's too high,
Okay.
10% or 10 feet, whichever is greater, or whichever is less, or it's a use that's not permitted, that requires a plan amendment. So the planning board cannot grant any deviations from that, nor
Okay.
can you grant deviations from the mandatory components.
Okay, but a plan amendment, is that the phrase you used?
Yeah, a redevelopment plan amendment. You would go through the entire process of amending the plan.
When you say the entire process, you mean like starting at step one?
No, you wouldn't start at the,
Oh, all the stuff short of that, okay.
yeah, so you wouldn't go back to the area need, but you would say, okay, we're going to now do an amendment to the redevelopment plan. You prepare that, it would go through the same process, governing body, planning board, then back to the governing body for adoption.
Okay. I do want to get some resolution, so, if I have my punch list here, there's already 2 items on it. A third one I'd like to discuss and consider is that access via the portion of the property facing Adamsville Road. Now, that's currently pretty heavily wooded, right?
Yes.
And you'd also, if you somehow could traverse that property, you would also hit the Cuckles Brook, correct?
You'd have to cross it.
Okay. So I guess that is not at all viable for emergency access or any other access, correct?
Well, it's there are permits for linear development that cross streams and that cross wetlands that you can get from the DEP.
Can
I'm
you
not saying that they would be valid here.
can you think of any reason why emergency access would be anticipated or necessary there? I mean, it just seems highly inefficient. There's so many other ways to get there.
It's not considered in the plan. There's no access consideration there.
All right, can we write in that there would be no access from the portion of the property abutting Adamsville Road? That would be my number 3 item.
Yes.
If I may, do we really want to do that? Because we only have, I say, one access for fire engines from Route 22. And
Well, but it's a heavily wooded area. You'd have to, you'd have to run fire trucks through the woods and over a brook.
right now it's heavily wooded, but in the future, there's chainsaws. I would think that having another access for a fire truck might come into that little section there.
I'd almost much rather a second entrance on 22 versus one on Adamsville. Right, where, I agree with you.
Our main one,
access.
well, you only really have 22,
Yeah,
and for whatever reason, it gets blocked.
Well, you have 22, and in the event of an extreme emergency, I mean, you could, get to or near that from Woodside.
Right.
And then presumably that's where the building is going to be. Related to that, I guess I would just like to understand, do we have the authority, or at what point in this process do we have authority to, confirm the desire and the intention to maintain the wooded portion, particularly of Block 221, Lot 102, that it is our intention that remain, nature, that remain as it is?
Yeah, the development of that area in terms of the stream corridor, flood hazard area, or any wetlands is subject to the state. In terms of any incursions into that, there's nothing in this plan that is suggesting that.
So is that sufficiently protected, or do we need to make a positive statement that we want to see that protected?
Well, it's required to have conservation easements around that.
I'd feel better about adding it in.
I'd like to add that in if we can, that, it is our intention that, I don't know exactly how we'd state that. But, particularly the, currently naturally habitated portion of block 221, lot 102 would remain that way. And I think by doing that, that would include the, the bulb, for lack of a better phrase, that extends to Adamsville Road.
So let me say this. I think that it's hard to use blocks and lots or lots to say that, because part of that lot is still developable and part of the lot is not. So it's hard to say it just on that lot. I know that we say in the objectives the preservation of the Kucklesbrook Stream Corridor, and that's in here.
Michael, what about just saying like no development within
Preserve and
the stream
protect.
corridor?
But so we're saying, the issue we have is that we don't have a delineation of that stream corridor, wetlands, or things like that. So if we say that, it's not giving us an objective standard in order to say that. So that's why it's in the goals and objectives, and in combination with the land use concept, and in combination with the permitted uses, and in combination with the stormwater regulations, that we think that we're doing enough to make that happen. The rest of it will be up to the planning board as the site plan rolls in to say, listen, we think you need more here, or you can go here. But there's going to have to be, if there's going to be any relief from or remediation of the ancient stormwater structures that are in there, and there's going to be work done in there if that has to be fixed and addressed. So absent being able to delineate a specific area to say you cannot go in there, I think the language we have provides sufficient basis for the planning board to maximize the degree to which that stream corridor remains untouched or restored, or however you guys.
Is that part even buildable if someone wanted to? If someone wanted to build if someone wanted to chainsaw that whole part down and start building something over there, is that even possible? Or I guess
within the stream corridor, they couldn't do it.
Okay, and they would have to, whatever they theoretically could build would be subject to the action that we're potentially taking here.
Absolutely, and even restoration of a wetland requires DEP permits, right? So.
But if I may suggest that we seek the input of the fire marshal, see what he thinks about that. And additionally, if we need to use some wetlands, I think that we have to develop new wetlands in a ratio of 2 to 1.
No, I think what you're getting, you're thinking about a diversion of open space or something like that, or a mitigation bank. That's not what would happen here.
No disrespect to our very dedicated fire marshal, but every fire marshal that I've ever dealt with would want 10 or 20 emergency access on any property. And I'm not being facetious here, but the Adamsville Road is, I think that's a policy decision. I think that there's environmental constraints, but I think ultimately it's a policy decision. Would we want to see Adamsville Road as an access point? I say no myself, and how we accomplish that, I'll leave Mr. Peck to guide us.
I think the people the applicants that would want to create that as an access point would be like a commercial recreational facility that would want another easy place to come into. I don't believe that, unfortunately, any applicant would spend the dollars to make that an access point for emergency vehicles only, either unless it was required. So I don't want it to be used for the wrong thing. With an applicant, I'd rather prevent it from being able to be used.
You have a lot of frontage on Route 22, and I think, Ashley, you mentioned that you could
can get there
potentially
through
add
Woodside.
could add another entrance in the western part of the frontage on 22.
And, you know, in the event of an extreme emergency, I mean, you shut down 22, you roll fire trucks the wrong way. I mean, you know, emergency activities have precedent over anything else. I'd like to see, some sufficient statement that, access will not be permitted onto Adamsville Road. I think that is a level of protection. I don't think it's viable anyway. I guess, Mr. Sullivan, I'm interested to understand in this report, is there sufficient recognition that area is environmentally sensitive and thus subject to, a wide range of state regulation?
No. We don't talk about wetlands and regulations like that because the state regulates it. In our mind, when we were preparing the report, we felt that because it's going to be subject to the R20 requirements, that any driveway of a commercial nature that crossed through it would require a plan amendment. But I would suggest that if there's a consensus that we don't want access there, we're just going to put that you can't have access there.
You could do that, but I would also draw the board's attention to Section 4 under Open Space and Conservation Requirements on page 15, which mandates that conservation easements shall be created for all lands composed of streams, stream corridors, wetlands, and wetlands transition areas, which just looking at the stream corridor, that there's no way you're accessing through Adamsville without running through the stream corridor. And if there's a conservation easement that's going to be over that anyway, that'll be delineated via meets and bounds and physical monumentation and signs. I mean, I think that's more than ample protection. Nobody's crossing that stream. Nobody's cutting down any trees in that stream corridor, which has yet to be delineated, but we can still with our own eyes see that it's, basically running north and south through the eastern section of the property.
I don't want to make this more complicated than it needs to be. I just want to make sure that there is sufficient protection, that that area will be left as it is and as it is intended, and that we're not going to see an access point.
I don't think you're going to get stronger protection than a conservation easement.
And that would be included.
That's mandated.
Okay. All right. I'm only one vote. I mean, I guess that's a sufficient response.
Yeah.
For me.
Again, it's up to the board. I have no say in that.
All right. I'm going to put.
If you want to say no, no.
I'm gonna put a question mark there. We can come back. Additional conversation about stormwater, the Cuckles Brook that runs under Adamsville Road. I think all those are subsumed by the conversation that we've had about water in general on this site. Let's see. On page 11, there was a comment about confirming that the single-family use would only occur in those proposed 3 lots on Woodside and would not be permitted elsewhere. So in other words, this could not become an entire neighborhood of single-family homes. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is that sufficiently protected in the document?
Yep, the plan, which
Okay.
shows that.
Okay. We talked about the high-capacity equipment needed for mostly cooling and the noise, so we've already discussed that. The masonry wall and all that, the whole low-frequency conversation. So all of that we've already, I believe, subsumed with the other comments. As far as exactly where this masonry wall is going to go and exactly where the building is going to go and any input at that point from the public and obviously decision-making from this planning board, that's all part of site plan, correct?
It's part of site plan because the ultimate configuration of the site plan will dictate where these things go. But I will say this, that the buffer actually does have a configuration requirement where that wall is on the inboard side, meaning it's on the inside of the buffer, so that the homes or residential zones where that wall is going to be located are not looking at the wall, they're looking at the 40-foot buffer that's between them and the wall.
Okay. And there was also concern raised about the bulk standards on pages 12 and 13, particularly the 4-story and the 50-foot. Where was that? Where did that come from? I mean,
It was from looking at other data centers and recreation centers, and also to provide, if we're talking about a 4-story, we're talking about senior housing, the multifamily housing, having an ability to have a pitched roof, be able to incorporate HVAC or other things within such a pitched roof, and to have flexibility so that they don't feel squashed.
So speaking to data centers as an example, is 4 stories a typical standard?
No, it's 1 to 2 stories is what we've seen. The examples I've looked
So this would be up to 4 stories. It doesn't mean that it must be 4 stories and 50 feet.
The ones that we've looked at were 2 to 3 stories and 50 feet.
Is there a such thing as a 4-story data center or not really?
There may be, but it's not one of the ones that we looked at.
Okay. And for senior housing, you would also think that, I mean, I guess there'd need to be elevators and things in all likelihood, but
Correct.
But you would envision a viable plan potentially being up to 4 stories for something like that too?
Yes.
Okay. I should have asked this question at the beginning, but or maybe this was already asked. We envision a developer coming in and picking one of the items from this menu. They're not going to start picking 2 and 3 items from this menu, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so it wouldn't be, okay, there's going to be 100 senior living here, and there's going to be a gym over here, and there's going to be a data center over here. That is not a scenario that would occur.
No, there's not enough room for that.
There's not?
There's not enough room for that.
Okay. So there's enough room for one viable use among those that are on the approved list?
Yes.
Okay. Does reducing the height make this less attractive for, substantially less attractive for, a developer? I mean, would a 30-foot or 35-foot, 40-foot, 40-foot, let's say, instead of 50, would that make this, unattractive or,
It would significantly reduce it would basically cut in half, the way I understand it, the data center floor area. And you would lose at least a floor of housing. So 25% less in terms of housing, 50% less data center.
So if we're concerned about bulk of what's going to be built here, whether it's housing or whether it's a data center, it would be subject to our bulk standards, subject to floor area ratio, subject to all the other items based on the size of the property, correct?
Correct. But the zoning in here is based on the property.
Okay, so I guess my question then is the quote unquote new bulk standards that you're proposing on page
12 and 13.
Thank you. On 12 and 13, are those substantially in line with what Bridgewater standards are today, with the exception of the height?
I don't know. These were developed for this particular site, looking at what the uses were going to be and what area we had. It wasn't really looked at as an evolution of existing zoning. It was looked at as a new set of bulk standards for this property.
And that's what redevelopment zones are. They're unique to a particular property at a particular location.
All right, but for instance, what concerns me potentially, are the setbacks, the floor area ratio, because those are gonna create the perception of bulk in the vicinity of residential neighborhoods. I'm looking at the floor area ratio as an example of 0.4. What is it in this zone right now?
0.35, I believe.
0.35. So it could be more intensive, but not like a doubling or anything like that. I need to kind of think and come back on the whole bulk standard question on pages 12 and 13. Let me see what else I've got. Questions about elevation and grade, and exactly how high at what height the building is going to be constructed, and things like that, and any berms and all that. That's all later in the process.
Yeah, that'll be during site plan development.
All right. There was concern about the height impact, potential height impact, depending upon where this, where a building or buildings would go with, the properties on Woodside, either, I guess, the existing ones or across the street, or perhaps even more importantly, these ones that would be built. I guess, again, that's also part of a site plan conversation rather than at this point, correct?
Correct.
All right. And then there was also a comment about easement buffers and setback details. I guess that's largely, what I've kind of flagged as sort of the bulk page 12 and 13 question.
So yeah, that was a question that was a good question. So the way that the bulk requirements are set up, there's a tract setback. And that basically says 70 feet from the tract boundaries is a setback for whatever happens here. There are yard standards that apply to the front yard, which is, Route 22. But then there's side yards and rear yards. Those are intended to apply to any new lots that are subdivided within here. But the tract boundary is what governs the offset from the edge. There's a 40-foot buffer standard as well. So there's a 70-foot setback for structures from the tract boundary. Then where you have residential zones or uses, you have a 40-foot buffer. That buffer is within the setback. They're not, you don't chain them together. So there's 70 feet for buildings and structures. The maximum height is 50, so the yard setback is greater than 1-to-1. It actually, it's 70 to 50. And then there's a 40-foot buffer requirement within that setback. That's the way that works.
All right, then I think where I am is, I've added 2 items. 50 feet means 50 feet. The additional commentary about noise impact studying and monitoring. I've kind of temporarily put in the parking lot the access via Adamsville Road, and whether or not we have sufficient protection to prevent that. I think my feeling is yes, it does. But that may be worthy of some additional discussion, and that leaves, I guess, for me, potential discussion of any of the bulk requirements on 12 and 13. So I'm resolved on adding 2 items. I think maybe some discussion on the Adamsville situation is warranted, and then maybe as our last item to come back to the bulk requirements. Those are my questions. I think I've set a record for questions in a public hearing.
Mr. Chairman?
I don't think you missed any.
Mr. Chairman, how do you suggest we proceed? Or if we have any more questions, and then are you then looking for comments from the board as to what next steps would be?
I'd like to hear from some of our professionals as well, just in case, because there might be something that shed some light on some of the concerns that we have. And then following that, if there are any remaining questions, if there are not, then I'd like to hear some general commentary and open up for deliberations. So with that, I'll ask Ms. Sarmed if she has any concerns, or if regarding the report, if there's any questions that we haven't asked that we could certainly take some insight from.
No, I actually don't have any questions. I think that there was a very thorough discussion here, very good questions from the residents and very good responses, I think, from the board, and a great presentation from Mr. Sullivan. I think the one thing to keep in mind is that, yeah, this is basically a zoning, like a very specific zoning ordinance. It puts the control and the power in the municipality to decide what they can and cannot do, and I think it's a very thorough redevelopment plan. So I have no other further questions.
Thank you. Our engineer, Mr. Burr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would echo what Catherine just said. I just had one point of clarification from Michael. So if there's not specific standards spelled out in this redevelopment plan, then any subsequent site plan would be subject to the underlying zoning standards that exist today, correct?
Excellent question. One of the things that I want to make a point of is that this is a superseding zone. This supersedes all ordinances, so the underlying zoning is going to go away. There will be a redevelopment area or zone, or whatever the zone is called. When that happens, the standards in here, as Bill said, these standards apply, but where they are silent, the standards that are underlying in the land development ordinances govern. So we don't spell out everything you need to do in a parking lot, right? We just talk about how many parking spaces you need, right? So what'll happen is you'll look at that and you'll go back to those standards. We're not going to reinvent your design standards. The only standards in here that have been developed are because of the specific nature of this site relative to the existing conditions and what the land use is and some of the concerns. So these are specialized standards for the most part, but where this plan is silent, the underlying development regulations and standards would apply. Is that right?
Thank you.
Mr. Burr, thank you. Are there any further questions from our board?
Is there anything, I do have one more, sorry. Is there anything in the ordinance, I keep going on the phone service because it's such a big issue in one of my athletic clubs that is surrounded by data centers. Is there anything in there that that they have to hold, that there needs to be the same experience for the residents around, right? So that they can't make a significant impact. So say it was a data center.
And when you say phone service, you mean cellular phone
Yeah.
service? Okay.
Like zero service, and I don't know if
Because of the electromagnetic or whatever scientific reason that happens?
Is Wi-Fi also impacted?
Oh, yeah.
No Wi-Fi?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Significantly, and data centers came up after the fact. So I just want to make sure that there's something, I know we talked about acoustical engineers, but we didn't address that piece, and I'd love to put something in there in case. So if there isn't any variances and somebody could put a data center in there, that it wouldn't affect the residents around.
Is there any way to put some sort of like impact study requirement in there about a cellular or wireless services that they would have to show at the planning board level, and then any mitigation that would be required? I was unfamiliar, actually thought that was a great point. I'm unfamiliar with how industry-wide that is, or if it's a known issue, or it's just an anecdotal issue, or if it's a known issue amongst data centers, and have they implemented mitigation techniques to help, help with that. So I think maybe, it's not to punt it, but just to say, maybe they have to show something at the board level during an application, and they'll be the ones to have to show the mitigation for it, whatever that may be, because like I said, it's new to me.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense, because at that point, they will have done the engineering, know where the location and dimensions of the building would be, and, so if there were mitigating features, that would be the time to discuss when you actually would have a plan, so.
I'm comfortable with that. So that's item number 3 on the punch list.
Or 4.
Well, it's 3. I still have one in the parking lot. I have 2 in the parking lot.
Right.
So that would be number 3.
Any other questions? Since we're looking at this from every angle, I did forget to ask a question. If this were to be a recreational facility, thinking about a ball field, whether it's football, soccer, there would be adequate space, I'm assuming, for a full field with parking in this spot, as far as the FAR goes?
I believe so, yeah.
And if it were to be one of those bubble-type structures,
It can only be indoors. It cannot be outdoors.
it could not be outdoors.
Indoor recreation only.
Indoor only, okay.
So would it need to have like a permanent roof, or would a bubble be considered indoors?
If it's considered a building, it would be considered indoors.
How do we differentiate whether a bubble is indoors, even though it is full-time indoors?
If it's a building.
If it's temporary or permanent. Also, just anecdotally, those will have to be about 75 feet. Particularly, I mean, it depends on the size, but a full football field size one will likely have to be a 75-foot height
Oh, so then we wouldn't make it.
Wouldn't meet it.
Wouldn't meet the-
Very likely wouldn't meet it.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmed. That narrows it down. Any other questions? Councilman Kirsch.
You know, I guess I got the two items in the parking lot. You know, again, this access via Adamsville Road, I mean, it's clearly not our intention for that to ever occur. I guess the question is does the redevelopment plan provide, as it's written, provide sufficient protection for that? Or you know, is there something additional that needs to be said? I'm not sure. I mean, I think I'm convinced that it is, but I wouldn't want to be disappointed later. I don't know how others feel.
I don't think there's any harm in being more definitive about it.
Is there sufficient support for that?
Mr. Peck, what would a condition of that magnitude look like?
I don't know, I'm trying to put it together in my head now.
It could be very simple. We'll just prohibit it. I mean, if that's what you guys want, we don't want to have any vagueness in this. It'll be prohibited.
You know, from an emergency standpoint, you know, you have obviously Route 22, you know, you'd have to have a colossal disaster to, you know, have 22 be completely unusable. You know, you still have Woodside, you know, I mean, they're, you know, they might not be pretty, but there are other ways to get in here. Probably prettier than going through the woods and over a stream or over a brook. So, you know, I you know, if there's sufficient support, I would like that protection in here. Okay, all right. Yeah. Yeah. If there's sufficient support on the board, you know, we've put in all this work, you know, I don't want to lose a whole lot of work over one item. If there's sufficient support, I'd love to see it included. If there isn't sufficient support, I'm still comfortable moving along with the application.
I vote to prohibit it.
Move down the dais.
To prohibit access?
Yes.
Mr. Wang?
Yeah.
Mr. Magura?
I feel uneasy about it, but I think there's alternatives. I think it could be put into use.
All right, well, you know, I'd like to include it. I think it's an important protection.
Mr. Atkins? Ms. Chartowitz?
Yeah, I would lean towards prohibit as well.
Ms. Sikora?
Okay, all right.
There's sufficient support for that.
Okay, then we're back to my last parking lot item, and thanks everyone for their indulgence. And this may be an area, you know, to particularly include, you know, Ms. Sarmad. You know, we're setting law here, you know, with this new table, and I just want to make sure that we're comfortable that these are in fact the right numbers. You know, given, you know, either what could be built there right now, you know, the warehouse that could be built there right now, another office building, right? Because someone could, there's no economic viability to it, but somebody could put up another office building there tomorrow, right? Without our taking any action, and they probably could conform and not even have to go to zoning board, correct? So, you know, I guess what I'm looking for is just some either guidance that these numbers appear right, or any areas where, you know, we need to, go back and with Mr. Sullivan fortunately still sitting here, you know, see if any of these new bulk standards seem inappropriate for this site.
I was not involved in the production of the zoning table and the redevelopment plan. So I will say that Mr. Sullivan's answer before was on point about how this was crafted with particular uses in mind. It all is within the plan connected. So the uses that are permitted and contemplated and the bulk standards that are contemplated are all interconnected. So he's absolutely right that this was for a particular site, for particular uses that think about all those things. What I will say is, just your question before about what zone is this in and what does that permit as far as FAR, it's 0.05 more. So it's not exponentially more, it's not double, it's not close. It's, that's 5% more. So it's not egregious, I'd say. And I think a lot of the other bulk standards were, like I said, probably configured with a certain use and uses on the property in mind to be able to accommodate them. So it differs. It's fundamentally going to differ from the N1B zone because it has different uses and different things contemplated than the M1B zone does. From looking at it, I think it's completely out of character with other industrial zones and other commercial zones in the township? No. I mean, we have a number of them, but when you look at them collectively, there are certain zones that allow for 60-foot building height, that allow for 0.4 FAR. So I don't think it's something completely out of character or out of the norm for what other zones contemplate. But is it new? Is it different than the M1B zone? Absolutely. That's why the redevelopment plan is being considered.
And your statement would apply particularly to the 60% coverage and the 40% FAR?
Yes, and the building height as well.
And the height. All right, while we're discussing the standards, are you also comfortable where we are on the rear yards and the side yards and all the other items that are on here?
I think so. I mean, again, those are more particular than some of the other ones that we just mentioned. But I feel comfortable that Mr. Sullivan had contemplated all of these things in zoning and looked at the property to evaluate and come to something that's appropriate.
Okay.
And I will say that even though this is a redevelopment plan, that I don't think this excludes other normal ordinance requirements we may have, with the exception of provisions that they've put in for certain requirements, but we have other requirements as well, and standards, like design standards that may still apply here when they are before the board.
All right, so that's table 2. I'm almost finished on table 2, but let me go to table 3. Do those largely meet the R10? Are they fairly consistent with the R10? Or maybe that's also a question for Mr. Sullivan.
Those are the R10.
Those are the R10 standards. Copy, paste, okay. All right, and then table 4, if we go down the path of age restricted, that would be a maximum 40 per building, and 250, I think, was for the whole site, correct?
6, 7 buildings.
Okay. The affordable, minimum affordable. Okay, and that's important because I was under the impression until a few weeks ago that 25% was a standard. It apparently is not a standard. It is whatever we choose it to be. But I think in Bridgewater, we have generally felt that 25% is an appropriate number.
25%, as I've said in meetings before, maybe not this meeting, but has been, when you're rezoning for affordable housing and set-asides, it's a reasonable standard. We're seeing projects that are actually getting built at that ratio. They've been approved and been built. And so if it's something we put in, there's a compensatory benefit to whoever would come to develop here because they don't have this zoning now, so there's a huge compensatory benefit. So yeah, 25% is where I would start and go up from there.
Okay. All right. I don't know if you can answer this question. I'll ask it either way. Do you think there's economic viability with this plan, assuming we move forward to it? Does this have economic viability as a data center?
I think it's got economic viability beyond what you have now, substantially beyond what you have now.
Okay. So, I mean, obviously the market will decide that, but you would not be surprised if the viability of a data center is determined and that we move forward with it as a data center. Would you also similarly not be surprised if somebody finds, if a data center is not desired, for whatever reason, that somebody might say that senior housing is economically viable and that perhaps this board would see an application for a site plan associated with senior housing?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so let me come to just back to table 2, and then this is probably a resolution of all my questions and concerns. I just want to make sure that we are, as a community and our residents who live nearby, we are protected from a monstrosity being built, or monstrosities being built. I know that's the purpose of bulk standards. It sounds like, Ms. Sarmad, you're satisfied that within the scope of these numbers, a significant development could and would occur, but it would not be what would generally be considered to be a monstrosity. Or is that in the eye of the beholder?
It's a relative term. I guess it depends on who you're talking to who would consider what that.
I mean, I guess if you want an open field, anything other than an open field is a monstrosity, right?
Like I said, I think that this is not completely out of line with other similar zones that we have, that are industrial or commercial in nature. It's not out of the norm. It's not like the lot lines and the setbacks have been set to 0, and the FAR is 2.0, not 0.4. So, in my opinion, I don't think it's going to lead to a monstrosity.
Okay. And now talking about who would be most impacted, it would be those along Woodside. So it would be the homes that this very developer is going to build. So presumably, the developer would be kind to him or herself. The other one that does concern me a little bit, though, is the Eagles. Now, does the Eagles property? I'm looking at the aerial here. I know there's a building. There's also a pavilion. I guess is that what's shown in like the dark gray, almost black, and then sort of the tannish color on it's on the cover page. Or is there a better view for me to look at? Oh, that is a little better. So what I see is, I guess my question is the Eagles property, both the part that's developed and the part that's undeveloped, that's what is entirely on the south boundary line of this property, correct? Okay. Now there is a wooded buffer there, correct?
There are some trees. That's the location where there was a swale that was developed there under the old failed site plan development. So there's some vegetation along that property line, but some of it is part of that swale.
Okay, so if I'm looking at your table 2, and I'm worried about the closeness to the Eagles, what would be in place, that would be considered the rear yard of this, right?
Track boundary.
Tract boundary?
I'm trying to back here to table 2.
Yeah, because I'm on page 12.
Page 12. Minimum setback to residential uses in districts, that's in a residential district, of 70 feet. The setback.
A minimum setback to residential uses would be 70. But how does that jive with minimum rear yard of being 100 feet?
If there are subdivisions within the tract, those would apply. So let's say that there's a subdivision between a data center and the existing office, or units for senior housing.
Mm-hmm.
Those apply to that. The tract boundary setback is applied to all tract boundaries, and that would include the.
And just for edification, the M1B zone presently requires a 50-foot rear yard setback.
So it would be more protection than one could be built today.
There is no buffer requirement to that property line, though.
Okay, and then I guess at a point where this planning board would hear site plan, if there was concerns about vegetation, buffering, and water mitigation and all that, because certainly we wouldn't want to harm the eagles with anything that we do here. All that would be part of that conversation, correct?
Yes.
If I may, I'm a little familiar with that property. There are like 3 buildings there. The one with the cars onto the right of it, that's their office building, if you want to call it that. North of that, you see that gray shaded area. That's an open-sided picnic
Pavilion?
pavilion where they cook hot dogs, hamburgers, and what have you. And someplace under the trees there, there's restrooms.
Okay.
And periodically, they also have motorcycle rallies there during the summertime.
Presuming that's legal, glad to know that that's being used for constructive purposes. Yeah, I guess then my question for Ms. Sarmat, and then I think I'm satisfied, is, do you feel that these standards, will provide the sufficient protection, particularly to the Eagles property?
I think so, and on top of that, just knowing this has to go before a planning board hearing, just like a zoning ordinance, yes, something can be conforming, but I think that there's ways in which this board can also say that certain things are important and emphasize that to whoever is before this board and say, and particularly if the property owner comes, to say, what can we do to make sure that there's not an adverse impact on the neighbors? Because if they are before the board and they are going to become these people's neighbors, then they should be a good neighbor and do those things. So, I think the redevelopment plan as a first layer, as a zoning ordinance, does a fine job at increasing the buffers or the setbacks as they presently exist in the zoning ordinance for the M1B zone. But I also think that if there are additional concerns that come up, if this is approved and then comes before the board as a planning board application, that doesn't mean that the bare minimums that are in the redevelopment plan can't be then bolstered by this board's input, for whether it be landscaping, vegetation, screening, whatever it may be, because it has to go through that whole board application process anyway.
So, if we're talking about public input, we're talking about transparency, we're talking about all these things. So, there's still many more times, not many, at least a few more times, where we as a community have the ability to make sure that this property is developed in a way that is comfortable for this community.
Correct. It still has to go through the normal process of a planning board application, even if this gets adopted by ordinance by the council. It absolutely has to go through the same venue. It has to go through completeness review. It has to be scheduled for a board hearing. It has to be duly noticed for that public hearing. It has to go through a full approval process, just like any other application, site plan application.
Okay. I think I'm satisfied, the .4, I'll have to, if I think about it for a few more minutes, I'm probably okay with. What I come back to on this is, the responsibility that we as a community have to make sure, this landowner has rights. This land, unless somebody wants to buy it, this landowner has rights. They have rights to develop it, and they have within scope. They have rights to develop it. They have rights to to be profitable. At the same time, we have residents, both those who are here and those who are not. We have a responsibility to protect them. I don't want to get into deliberation, but my questions have basically been satisfied.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other questions? Mr. Peck, I believe at this point, we have suggested a few changes or amendments.
What I would recommend, I'm assuming Mr. Sullivan picked up the various edits that were.
Why don't I go through them, just so?
Yeah, you want to give a list?
Like what I heard, and
yeah.
And that way.
And I don't believe that any of them are so substantive that it would need to delay anything. A motion could just be made, and I, prepared an anticipatory resolution, so we could just do an edit there saying, in the last whereas, that it's subject to the edits and clarifications of record, and then after the now therefore be it resolved, it'd be that you'd recommend that the council adopt the redevelopment plan, blah, 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 as amended. And it'll be attached as a resolution.
and-
Mr. Sullivan could go through the.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, before you go through, because it is critically important, the changes appear to be relatively minor in nature and would result in a draft number 3 being available for the council on Thursday. And your commentary presumably would acknowledge the lengthy hearing that we had, the significant public input that we heard, resulting in the following 3 changes, so that there's a clear explanation for how version 3 is different than the version 2 that has been distributed to the council and presumably also to the public, same way this one was. Okay.
Here are the changes that I heard. One, revise the plan to specifically state that the maximum height is 50 feet, and that does not include any mechanicals above that. Clarify that. 2 was to ensure that, put language in here that references including the acoustic performance requirements in a redeveloper agreement. 3 was prohibiting access to Adamsville Road.
And then the fourth one was from Ms. Sikora.
Fourth one was at a similar point, I don't know that I can get into as much detail, but about a study to examine the impact of the predicted impact and actual post-construction impact of a data center on cellular and wireless communications.
Yeah, maybe it's like a predicted impact on any changes to residents.
That or ways in which they have encountered this previously and what can be done. You know, it may be in the form of an impact study, it may be in form of acknowledgement of it, the whole point of an impact study is to figure out what the mitigation needs to be. So I think it needs to either be some sort of statement that says the applicant shall address this and figure out what the mitigation is if there is any.
Pre-application and post-approval impact study.
Yes.
Here's what we think the impacts will be, and then once it's built, here's what the impacts actually are, and then build in like whatever site plan. Well, we're getting way ahead of ourselves at this point. But whatever site plan could, just condition that, hey, if the post-construction impact study shows that there's actually, some impact, some negative impact, it has to be mitigated, something like that.
I think this is great. I think you have to be really careful with the language because I don't think we're in a position to guarantee anything for anyone. And I think that could be a stretch.
Not. And I don't think it's guaranteeing, it's just simply that they would have to mitigate. It's not like we're gonna say that the levels of whatever data service are gonna be any better or worse. It's really about the applicant addressing it if it is something that they have encountered industry-wide.
Well, again, the language is important. Directing someone to mitigate is a very definitive statement. Yes. And I think you have to be careful with that.
So only mitigate if there's a negative if there's a negative impact that they.
Because of their build. There could be other things that cause, I don't know.
Right, if there's already problems
Right.
there, we
Yeah,
can't
right,
hold them
right.
responsible.
But maybe it's something that,
That's the point.
because of their,
I remember as a kid, there was a neighbor who had a ham radio. And when he got on that ham radio, in the old days when you didn't have cable, the TV reception, and you could hear him over the TV. Right? I mean, does anyone ever experience that? So I think you have to be careful that, the responsibility, you can't make a property owner responsible to address everyone's problems that could be encountered.
I think that there has to be a way to say, the club that I am going to tomorrow, they added a data center and it went from having cellular service to 0 cellular service. And there are 2 there. I don't know if it's a specific data center. I'm not a guru by any means. I don't know the reasons why. I just know when that build happened, that's when it changed. So maybe there's verbiage that you could put in that doesn't, make that landowner responsible for mitigating anything, but if there's an impact to what they've done.
The other option is if somebody does come in with a data center, because we don't know yet. They could come in with senior, they could come in with the rec center, they come with that. then those conversations prior to a redeveloper agreement or consistency review, that could be handled in a redeveloper agreement. I mean, now that we're on note, I mean, like I think I don't know if there's enough time to research this from a technical perspective to actually sound coherent. For me to sound coherent in a redevelopment plan at this point, it's just hard to do, and without unintended consequences. And I think that if somebody does come up with the data center, understanding that we have these concerns now, that you could require that as part of a redeveloper agreement, that's going to happen. And I think that's one way to handle it.
So assuming that there are no issues that exist today, right? Instead of looking for problems that don't exist, how can you hold a data center accountable, for example, for using a disruptive technology? There could be something as simple as like a microwave that's being used for site to site that could be disrupting, radio signal, radio frequency. So how do you hold a data center vendor accountable for the type of disruptive technology that might, right?
It's a difficult proposition because they'd have to actually go into everybody's house and operate cell phones or wireless, right? To figure out what the baseline conditions are, right? Because you want to know everybody's baseline conditions. Then you build it and you say, okay, your baseline conditions change. It's sort of like well testing. It's like sound attenuation, things like that. I don't know how to really articulate that.
Well, I think we can identify it as a concern to be addressed in the redeveloper agreement, correct?
We can. It's going to be very vague language, but we can just, if that's the way we want to do it, we can put it in there. It's not a
Just want to make sure it gets addressed with an applicant that maybe doesn't show up with variances.
Well, I'm going to say this. Being designated a redeveloper and coming for a site plan is not an easy process. You have to be designated as a redeveloper, which requires other things. You have to enter into a redevelopment agreement. Before you can come to the planning board, you need a consistency review to say that you conform with the plan and you can go forward. There's a lot of these points. So we can put language in here that basically puts everyone on alert. That's the best I think I can do in this short time.
I think alerting language is appropriate because, again, we're not technologists here. We're just looking out for the well-being of our community.
Exactly.
Okay, and then I guess I'm back to, maybe the page 12. If the board's comfortable with page 12, then I guess we're comfortable with page 12.
Assuming you mean the .4.
Basically, I mean the .4, and the maximum coverage .6, 60% goes with the .4. I'm inclined to put my trust in our professional that these numbers have been calculated appropriately. But again, I'm only one vote.
I would agree with you.
I would agree as well.
Okay, all right, then we have 4 relatively limited additions, all of which could be incorporated in time for Thursday night.
I wish I brought my laptop out.
You could be having them right now.
Done by now.
All right. Even better. Okay.
Okay, Mr. Peck, that should address all the concerns and the amendments that have been addressed for this evening. So at that point, what I'll do is I'll take a motion to enter deliberations in. That's Mr. Pappas.
Second.
That's Ms. Sikora.
So it's really for the board to consider 2 things. One, is it consistent with the master plan? And 2, is the plan as amended this evening, is it something you want to recommend to the Township Council as something they wish to adopt and implement as an ordinance?
And with that, I'll begin with Mr. Magura.
I would have to say, yeah, I'll go with the plan as amended by the several comments we came up with.
Mr. Wang?
Yes, thank you. I think I go with the plan written with the amendment we discussed now. Thank you.
Mr. Atkins.
I'd just say the amended version seems preferable.
Ms. Charterwitz?
So I'm just looking at the various ways that we're supposed to recommend. Do we recommend it? Do we need an amended resolution for this, or?
Well, that's why I said there's the resolution that I prepared in anticipation. If you go to page 5, I would just recommend in the final whereas, where it says the board took action recommending to the Township Council that the plan be adopted, I would add, subject to the edits and clarifications of record.
Okay.
So that would be borne out. And again, the edited redevelopment plan will be attached as an exhibit to the resolution. So then I have then under the now therefore be it resolved, where it says Bridgewater Township Planning Board recommends that the Bridgewater Township Council adopt the Graymark Office Tract Redevelopment Plan dated February 2025. Then I would add as amended, comma, and attach as exhibit A pursuant to the blah, blah, blah. So I think that would account for.
But the only thing I just request is that somewhere you put in there in 4 instances, so it's clear that there are four items on the list. You know, and I think Mr. Sullivan will be the one who spells out exactly what they are, but I think if you could.
I can do that. So where I say subject to edits and clarifications of record, I can say colon 1, 2.
Okay.
With what we have.
All right, and then just so we will, okay, that makes sense.
Okay, I'll continue with the deliberations. Mr. Pappas.
I support the plan as amended. Just a couple of additional comments. It was discussed here. The members of the public spent a considerable amount of time, and I appreciate that, and concerns and the questions. But the backdrop, the reality of this, the backdrop is the zoning board application and the litigation between the property owner and the township regarding an amendment to the zoning ordinance that the council approved. And that's, from my perspective, an important consideration in this. This is Route 22, obviously a major corridor in the township, if not the region, and you know, seeking the most appropriate use for this parcel is important, but also in the context of the lawsuit, the zone change that prompted the lawsuit, and the zoning board application. Thank you.
Councilman Kirsch.
Thank you. You know, I've pretty much tipped my hand. You know, I do support this. I am happy about the collaborative nature, the collaborative process that we've all undertaken. You know, this is step, I believe, 5 of 6. Certainly appreciate the public who's here, the public who has shown interest. You know, I'm in the unique position, you know, being the council representative on this board. You know, I'll see you again on Thursday, Mr. Sullivan. This time with, I sit on that side of the dais for council meetings. Yeah. You know, I think this is a good plan. I think we do need to overlay what else it could be, because clearly this property is going to be developed as something. So I think we do need to look at, you know, what some of the alternatives could be. You know, obviously I take the responsibility to you know, represent our public very, very seriously. You know, no plan is perfect. But I think that we have come up with a good approach that makes this property economically viable, hopefully satisfies the needs of that landowner as they have rights, while at the same time you know protecting the immediate neighborhood. I will be excited to see environmental improvements on this site. I think this is the pathway. I think leaving it as it is for many years has created some of the literally downstream consequences, not only you know, here on you know, the Adamsville Road area, but I know you know, even further down Cuckles Brook, there's been some horrible flooding. There've been some major challenges. So you know, I see this as a pathway for significant improvement, economic viability, and to the greatest extent possible, maintaining the character of this neighborhood and protecting these residents. So I support advancing it to the next stage.
Ms. Sikora?
I agree with the proposed changes in there. I'm looking forward to seeing something that could improve the water issues that are there and have some remediation to what is currently there and causing some concerns. Obviously, that'll take some time, but I'm looking forward to something that'll improve the area, not be a hindrance to it.
I also do find that Mr. Sullivan's plan is consistent with the master plan, and I know that the safety and the comfort of the residents does come first, especially the environmental issues. We've looked at these over the course of a few meetings now, and I think that development on that land will be positive development, positive in the right direction, but we'll also have to look and see what's economically viable for Bridgewater, as the councilman said. And I believe it's probably the best scenario given the limitations of this area, but I also it's qualified. I do believe it's qualified to be, whether it's a data center or potentially an age-restricted community. That remains to be seen. So for those reasons, I do support it, and I would refer it to council as well. And with that being said, at this point, we'll just need a motion to essentially refer this to council.
Yep, with recommendation that they adopt it.
Right.
As an ordinance. So basically to adopt the ordinance, the resolution as amended tonight.
Who would like to make that motion?
I'll make the motion.
That's Ms. Sikora. I'll need a second.
I'll second.
That's Ms. Chartowitz. Ms. Probst, could I have a roll call, please?
Chairman Vesio,
Yes.
Councilman Kirsch.
Yes.
Mr. Pappas,
Yes.
Mr. Magora.
Yes.
Mr. Wang. Ms. Sikora.
Yes.
Ms. Chartowitz.
Yes.
Mr. Atkins.
Mr. Sullivan, thank you very much for your comprehensive report. I'd also like to thank the members of the public for coming out as well. Thank you very much for your insight. We look forward to seeing a successful project some point in the future. Thank you. Could you please come to the dais, if you don't mind, to the lectern?
Following along out in public here, so I guess you just all voted to send this to the council, right?
With the amendments that were noted. So what you will see, and Mr. Sullivan can confirm this, is that you will see a version 3 that will be different from version 2 in the 4 ways that we mentioned.
And version 3?
I got my numbers wrong. Version 2 is going to become version 3. Excuse me for that. It's obviously late. So version 2 will become version 3 with the 4 items that we've discussed, the 4 important protections that we believe we've added to the proposal. That will be prepared in time for Thursday. That will be what the council considers introduction of an ordinance, and that's a 2-step process. So it will be introduced on Thursday the 20th. It would then, presuming it's passed on first reading, it would then be scheduled for public hearing either 2 or 3 weeks later, depending upon when our schedule is. And it is at that point there would be a full public hearing, advertised, everybody to speak about how they feel about the plan, whether or not they would suggest that we adopt it.
And so that public hearing is not going to occur at the council meeting?
That is the council meeting. That is the council meeting. So
On the 20th, though?
Well, the 20th is a regular council meeting. The action taken on an ordinance, it's 2 readings. It's an introduction, and which is not subject to public hearing, but we do have public input. So all of our meetings are open to the public. We have a section, a segment for open public comment, whether it's on agenda or non-agenda items. So if you want to come on Thursday night and address council, you're certainly welcome to. The action that council will be asked to take is introduction, which is a first reading, that then sets up advertisement and then the public hearing that occurs either 2 or 3 weeks later, depending upon our schedule. There will then be a full public hearing where everybody and anybody that wants to speak specifically on that topic will have the opportunity to speak on that topic.
And will the resolution be voted on that second meeting that's public?
The second, well, it's an ordinance. The second meeting is, there is a public hearing where we receive input and then have the ability to either adopt as is or potentially request a change, which would then, I guess, likely be a reintroduction, because we're pretty limited with changes that we can make in an ordinance, because an ordinance is published. So we pretty much have the choice of either yay or nay. There have been instances, if something comes up, where we say, you know what, we got to change it, and then we would reintroduce. But in all likelihood, you're looking at an introduction, and then you're looking at a hearing, followed by a vote.
Tangible contributions of the public input, though, okay? I mean, we gave input prior to even the presentation of this tonight, and that was based on our advanced information and access to the document, to the RDP. So down the road, there's going to be a public hearing. There's going to be an introduction on Thursday of this week. Then there's going to be a meeting scheduled, which is going to be a public meeting, and then the public will be able to put their stamp on commenting about everything at that point.
The public will be able to make any comment it wants on that subject during that public hearing.
And if we come to the meeting on Thursday of this week, we're limited to 3 minutes at the public portion of the meeting. And are we going to be able to see this change sheet that has the 4 items stipulated on it that are going to be addendum attached to the RDP that Mr.
You know, I would defer to how quickly Mr. Sullivan can get it and how quickly we can update it on our
The expectation, excuse me, Mr. Kirsch, the expectation is Mr. Sullivan will prepare it and it will be available to the public by Thursday night. It may not be on the website. We're not going to commit to that, but it would be completed and available to the public on Thursday night, perhaps or sooner, but Thursday night.
We will certainly aim to get it. We're not going to sit on this.
The
Mr.
draft-
Sullivan stated that if he had his laptop, it'd be done now.
The draft, the document that the planning board considered has been on the township website since March the 10th. So that document, which is largely what we've approved, except for the edits, has been available to the public since March the 10th.
So that document that'll be available to the subsequent meeting 2 weeks after Thursday or whatever it is.
Well, that you'll have to
be Rev 3 of the official.
That version 3 will have to be available because the action we take on Thursday is first reading, which then authorizes publication. That's the public notice, which requires the full document to be made available to the public.
Yeah. I tell you that this is the most untransparent process I've ever been
It's
through.
the process that's laid out by state statute.
Mr.
We're following it completely, and you've made that point now countless times.
Mr.
so-
Chairman,
Mr. Pappas.
Mr. Kraut, you and I have spent considerable amount of time one-on-one where you've come to the municipal building, and I've spent time reviewing this process with you. This goes back probably a couple of months. I know you also spoke to Mr. Burr, had the same conversation with him, and he described the same process to you. The second time you came to my office, Mayor Mensch was there. You also had that conversation with him. So you have, the process was, and then you came to a council meeting subsequent to that, and you were given the same information. So you understand the process.
I understand.
believe you understand the process. You are expressing,
less than I
you are expressing an opinion that it is not transparent from your perspective. And that's an opinion. You're entitled to your opinion, but you have been given a considerable amount of time, and frankly, any member of the public that would contact us would be given that same courtesy. So I think I had to make a statement here to put in context what I know we have done to be responsive to you.
Look, as far as, the ground rules that Mr. Sullivan used, I would have thought that there would have been some sort of market analysis about potential uses and things like that would be highly marketable, and maybe even had a discussion with the current owner and developer of the property to find out if any of those made sense in terms of the saleability of that property, because right now he's going to if you're successful with this process, then he's not going to be able to build a warehouse.
Sir, that's the job of the landowner. We're not going to keep, we're following state statute. We're not going to keep going back and forth about this.
Mr. Kraut, the purpose for the planning board this evening was to determine whether or not his plan was consistent with the master plan. This is the planning board.
Right.
The other business will be heard.
And I know the hour is late and we will want to adjourn, but the other issue is that, we are subject to state law, state regulation. In the event that we or any other land use board do not follow that, that's where you reach a point of litigation. So while it might have been our preference to be able to open questioning to Mr. Sullivan, that's simply not the process that's provided. Had we deviated from that process, we would have really called into question the viability of this entire hearing and its result. And then we would likely see additional litigation. So, it is our desire as a community, as a land use board, to make sure that we are following the rules as they're provided, the regulations as they exist, doing what is right for Bridgewater and protecting, the rights of this landowner, and that he or she, they have rights, as well as the interests of the rest of the community, and particularly the neighbors. So that's our position. And if you agree with some of what we've done, you disagree with some of what we've done, that's something I'd welcome to see you again on Thursday.
Discussion.
Yeah.
It's just that there's 3 of these AINR properties that I'm aware of in the township. One is the Ethicon site, one is this Graymark site, and the other is the yard waste site.
Yeah.
We've provided sufficient time for public commentary.
All right.
I'm sorry?
We've provided
All right.
sufficient time for public commentary.
All right. I'm sure we'll see you Thursday.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you.
And again, thank you to members of the public. Moving along this evening, don't believe you have any other business. However, Ms. Probst, I'd like to check to see what is on the planning board's calendar for the foreseeable future.
We don't have anything scheduled for the next meeting.
We worked so hard tonight, we get a night off.
Yep, 4/1, I don't have anything scheduled for 4/1 or 4/15 at this point. Next 2
Possible.
4:15 is the
4:15.
spring break, so you know.
Yeah, there will be some attendance
break
issues.
is
4:15.
15th, so I think.
So would you like to cancel the first now, or do you want to leave that open and I can cancel it once we confirm we don't need it for any kind of follow-up?
We shouldn't cancel anything.
Is it realistic for any business to,
Not at this point.
not for April 1st?
We have 2 applications for the planning board that are still in completeness, so they would not be.
Is there any possibility that anything is required as follow-up here? So
I'm hesitant to cancel.
I'd be hesitant to cancel.
Wait,
Just leave them open and cancel it.
I just think you might have attendance issues on the 15th. Like, I know I can't be here, and there's many of us who can't be here on the 15th.
We won't have any applications, let me put it that way,
All right.
for the 15th.
We'll leave the dates as is. As of this moment, there are meetings scheduled for the 1st and the 15th.
I'll cancel it prior to the meeting.
Okay. Very good. Any other comments or questions? Take a motion to adjourn.
I'll make the motion.
Mr. Cora, second.
I'll second.
That's Mr. Pappas and Ms. Charter. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. You held it that whole time. Pretty good.